Order. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. Today is our second session of our inquiry into children's TV and video content, and as well as taking evidence, we are going to be launching a survey for parents' views about what their children can and do watch, and that will be available on our website and our social media later today. But first, we welcome our panel, and we are very grateful for the first of all, I want to point out that they had to postpone their meeting earlier last month due to events with the BBC and in the chamber. So we've managed to get them back in again thanks to their patience with us. And these are three individuals with incredible experience: Richard Bradley, Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Lion TV; Ollie Hyatt, co-founder and joint managing director of Blue Zoo Animation Studios; and Maddie Moate, TV presenter, YouTuber and author. Thank you all for your patience, for making yourselves available for us again, and for joining us this morning. As I say, but before we begin, members, please declare any interest before you ask your questions. And I'm going to kick off, if I can, please. In our first session, I don't know if any of you had the chance to see it, but we asked Frank Cottrell-Boyce and Greg Childs what made good children's telly. And Greg said, "It is content that has purpose, meaning, warmth, and emotional resonance that connects you to something, and is constructed with care in mind." What do you think makes good TV, good children's TV, good content, Richard?
I would echo all of what Frank said. I think about it often as the process of making mindful rather than mindless television, so that the idea that you are engaging with the audience, you in that process, in that creative process, there is that care and attention that goes into, say, cooking a good meal, or something that there's care and attention to that goes into it. That it finds ways to connect with the audience, whether that's to inform them, to make them laugh, to enrich their lives. And I think good television is nourishing, to carry on with a food analogy, that actually in a way it nourishes the audience. It lives beyond the moment of watching and viewing, and lives and sparks the imagination. And I think great children's television does just that. It sparks the imagination. It lives with you. Baroness Fleur Benjamin has a great phrase: childhood lasts a lifetime. And I think good children's television can last a lifetime. It stays with you in your memory forever.
We're hoping that she's going to join us as one of our panellists in the new year. Yeah, along with Big Ted and Little Ted and Hunty, if we're very lucky. None of you will remember what that is. Ollie, what makes good children's TV, and what are the important things that you consider when you're developing ideas and putting your creativity into reality?
What I would say is, first of all, what makes good children's TV? I think we sound like dinosaurs saying that. So what makes good children's content? What is a TV? My son's come to watch today. TV's a box on the wall, right? What comes through it can be anything. It can be games, quizzes, live action, animation, podcast, radio, films, and then beyond that, VR and AR. And I think when we're sitting here talking about kids' TV, they will be crying out, and their needs are for what is a good content mix for them. What is their diet of content, not just kids' TV? And I believe we can just look back to public service, the original public service: inspire, educate, and entertain, especially for children. And I just want to break that down really briefly into some subcategories within those pillars. So educate, educational and developmental value. What's the clear learning? What's the developmental goals? Is it literacy? Is it history, numeracy, language, curiosity, self-regulation? And then child-centred and age-appropriate design. So what's the pacing? What's the complexity? What are the themes and format designed around what each individual child at that age can understand and use and take in? And then inspire. What shapes their identity? Empathy, imagination, and a sense of possibility. So under that, I would say the pillars are emotional and social quality. Models out empathy, friendships, problem solving, handling of conflict, big feelings in a healthy, age-appropriate way. Cultural value. It reflects their own lives, their communities, voices, and values. Helps them reflect on these while opening a window to other possibilities, other worlds, culture, diversity. and news and information given to them from trusted sources. It inspires questions, play and positive behaviours beyond the screen. And then entertainment. It delights, engages, keeps children coming back for the right reasons. So craft and narrative quality, which you just mentioned, storytelling, humour design, character, world building, things people can engage with for a long time and stays with them, not just noise and jump cuts. And then engagement and impact. Children choose it, return to it, and it sustains attention in a developmentally healthy way and leaves them feeling satisfied, not sort of dysregulated. And by the nature of that, the opposite, which is often something easy to answer, is what is low quality content? It's content which primarily aims to capture and monetize attention, regardless of age, appropriateness, quality or impact. The doom scrolling of content which offers little genuine educational or emotional value, often AI brain rot, normalises shallow or harmful social models, and relies on hyperstimulation, manipulative design and opaque commercial practices, traps children in algorithms and doesn't let children look sideways. It leaves them more agitated than engaged, more confused than informed, and sometimes more isolated than inspires. And that.
Thank you very much. That's very comprehensive. Wow.
Sorry, that's the only bit I'm going to read because I think it was so important to kind of understand.
Very good. I think we've made a lot of notes for that. Thank you very much. Maddie, same question to you. What makes good children's TV and content, and what important things do you consider when you're developing ideas and bringing your creativity to life?
So something that is really important to me when making content, whether that is working alongside a production company to create a television program, or if it's creating content for my own YouTube channel, is it might seem counterproductive, but I'm always thinking, is this piece of content going to encourage the child to leave the screen and have a positive interaction with the real world afterwards? So I want them to watch my content and feel inspired to get outside, go and explore somewhere, be curious and learn for themselves. Whether that might be watching a piece of history content and they're encouraged to want to go to Warwick Castle or explore some ruins, whether they watch an animation and want to pick up some number blocks and play for themselves, or it might simply just be wanting to get outside in the garden and go look for mini beasts. I think content is most successful for children when it actually inspires them beyond the screen and it makes them want to physically get involved with the real world.
Thank you. That's a really nice answer. Now, you all make TV content or books or stage shows that you hope will be educational and inspire children. Now, full disclosure, before you answer this question, both Rupa and I are related to children's television presenters. But what programme or presenter, so no pressure, but what programme or presenter inspired you when you were a child, Richard?
It was the whole gamut. Including, I think, your father. But the whole, I was an avid watcher of children's television, and it was the classic Blue Peters in my day, Val Singleton and John Noakes. It was Vision On. There was a fantastic, short-lived African show called Daktari, which I loved. But no, it was a whole, and then Saturday morning television. It gave me a sense of sort of fun, community. But actually, we've mentioned her already this morning. But Floella Benjamin and Brian Cant, I don't know, Play Away and Play Dates. Those, And I think, to my point about they live with you forever, we know I can still have conversations with my peer group about all of those programs and so on. So, yeah, that would be my inspiration. Ollie's younger than me.
No, I'm going to say very old reference now. I'm going to go for the animation one, obviously being an animation, but Bagpuss when I was young. And that, again, the warmth of the recognition of that, and I think there is something about the shared experience of watching something like a Bagpuss, being able to talk to everyone my age about it and get the same reaction. I think there were only 8 episodes made, and I could probably sing you all the songs still. But it's just the sense of community, and I think that's something that in this diverse world with so many platforms, I think we sometimes miss in the youth the common connections, which I think is an important cultural and sort of social aspect.
We're stuck for time, Ollie. Later we might come back to you for one of those songs, but in the meantime we'll move on. Thank you, Maddie. Who inspired you?
For me, all the Blue Peter presenters across the board. I don't know if I think most people, when they were growing up at some point, wanted to be a Blue Peter presenter. It was inspiring seeing young people going on adventures, seeing the world, meeting new people. But actually, to sort of echo a bit what you're saying about animation, I really looked up to a lot of animated female characters, simply because at the time those sort of people weren't being represented in human form. So I absolutely loved Eliza Thornberry from the Wild Thornberrys. She was an adventurer who could speak to animals, and I was someone who loved science, loved biology, but at the time I wasn't seeing many women in science on television. So actually animation and fictional characters were really important for that reason. And for me, I think it's one of the reasons now why I think it's important that whilst animation is obviously wonderful, it is important that we still have real faces on television doing things as well.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing, which is I'm dyslexic, so I struggled a lot at primary school and didn't really progress that far because we were stuck in the model, and I think we still are in a way, of children sat in rows watching a teacher. I remember the joy I had once a week when the big telly got wheeled in. Do you remember the big telly?
Yeah.
And you got to be presented with something different in a different way that engaged me and helped me learn. And I think we're here talking about children's TV, and we'll go, and we think, little children's TV. We have all the tools at our disposal that we can change children's lives. And I can give you a very clear example from Horrible Histories. My youngest son, Ziggy, not interested in history at all. He watched an episode of Horrible Histories where they were talking about the Armada and the failing of the Armada. They keep coming, and they keep failing without even firing a bullet, really. And he was like, well, what's the Armada? Because in the sketch there were no boats. So we went onto YouTube and we found a picture of the Armada, and he saw the warboats. And then he said, well, can we go and see something? So we booked a little trip and we went and saw the Mary Rose. And then we went to the Mary Rose exhibition, and they had interactive, immersive experiences, actors projected on, animations, things they could touch and poke. He came home, he went on his Xbox, he went to Minecraft, and he built a version of Mary Rose underwater. And then we bought a model, he plays it. And that is a child educating itself through being ignited from something they have seen from children's television. I could give you example after example with my own children. And I think we are missing a trick if we just think this is kids' TV, it's a nice thing, isn't it? They sit and watch it. For me, it can be education. It can change children's lives. It can open them up to everything. I think it's so important.
But I also think we're missing a trick if we just assume that ignition can only come from children's television. Actually, that same sense of purpose and wanting to go out and research something and that independent learning, it can come from online content as well. It can absolutely come from YouTube. It's just at the moment, parents, all of us, we see YouTube as this pit of content where children just get lost. There is really good stuff with that same power there. It's just we need to find a way to surface it so that it's easier for parents and children to find it.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Rupert, please.
Thanks. Yeah, and amazing to have people behind legendary things and a legend before us. Thanks for the trip down memory lane. I don't know if you, like me, get the impression that there is a kind of shrinking space of original drama and factual stuff for children on the BBC, for example. So you said YouTube's a good way to access it. Do you think iPlayer is? Because apparently under 7s very rarely look at iPlayer, and that's where a lot of stuff has moved to. Blue Peter, for example, if they get 25,000 now, that's considered good, and it's on iPlayer only. I mean, do you think that's... it's on CBeebies.
I jump in. I think the BBC is trying hard to putting their great brands and the things that they know have already established themselves in the minds of children onto iPlayer. I don't think that's the answer. I think it may be part of the answer, and iPlayer might be part of a bigger answer. But in the end, the young audience is going to places like YouTube or to Roblox or whatever. You cannot drive it there. It's like the greatest candy store, sweet shop in the world. You can't. So I think that I'm not saying that the iPlayer is will fail, but I think, and some children will find there, and it may have the advantage that some parents who've got that sort of relationship with their kids can say, go to iPlayer because it's safe, but children themselves, I think, will go to YouTube. So I think, increasingly we're looking at how, with something like Horrible Histories, which is already well established, how do you place it on YouTube in a way that people will be able to find it? So I don't think, I think the idea of trying to create a wave of youngsters heading to iPlayer is not going to work in the end. I think it's swimming against the tide.
We have to meet the children where they're at. You could populate iPlayer with as much content as possible, but the reality is they're just not there. They're not going there. It's not a place that they necessarily see for themselves. They are heading to other platforms. So I think it's important.
As you probably know, 720,000 hours of content going up on YouTube every day. It would take one of us a decade of our lives to watch all of that. There's so much there. Obviously, not all of that's for children by any means, but I think it's the range that's offered elsewhere means that people are not going to, unless they've already got something, and then they will work out where to find it.
I am the dad that says go on iPlayer, but given a choice, again, I have to say, come on, Bugsy, turn that off, put iPlayer on. But I would also say that if you've got to look at the They have been going up slightly. They have had some success in pulling it back, but it's a drop in the ocean. What I would say is you have to look at the value proposition of the value people place on kids' content. So for the iPlayer, they get about 9 billion clicks a year, which they're very, very pleased about on all their content, 9 billion clicks. On YouTube, my content alone, my one show, gets 11 billion clicks a year. So I'm getting 2 billion more clicks. Now, how much money do YouTube pay me for those clicks? Not enough money to pay for 20% of the content that I fund it. Without the BBC funding my shows, which do immeasurable good for children and are super popular all around the world and are used in, I think it was like 90% of primary schools use it to help educate their children. Without the BBC funding that, I can't make my shows. So I'm going to ask you, does it matter if children are watching it on the iPlayer? Does it matter if they're watching it somewhere else? Does it matter if they're watching on a phone, on Sky, on Netflix? Why shouldn't we make our content that we have paid for as license fee pay? Why shouldn't it be everywhere children are? Yeah. That's what I believe.
Yeah. Sorry to just add, I would just add that doesn't mean that large numbers of people are not watching it. And I was just saying that I think Horrible Histories was watched 8.6 million hours last year on iPlayer. So it's not that it's not happening. It's just that in the end, what Ollie says is that if great content is being made, we should and we can still find a way to fund that. And the BBC has been stellar in doing that. We should find out ways to make it available where the children will watch it.
Thanks. Yeah, I do get the impression that there's less and less. Like when Channel 4 started, they had things like Pop and Mini Pops. I don't think it does any.
Channel 4 for that age group has stopped entirely. Right. ITV made no hours of children's last year. Sky Kids has just closed. They had a very good champion at Sky Kids, Lucy Murphy, and they have closed. So, and then the BBC itself is under pressure, so it's making fewer hours. I think without getting too existential about it, if the BBC, anything were to happen to BBC Children's, there would be no drama, no high-end live action content made for British kids, with British kids at the heart of it and the heart of the thinking about it, anywhere. So it's precarious. I think we live in precarious times.
As a presenter on the channel, I can't speak as a producer, but as you were saying, there is less money available for the BBC to make children's content. But something I've noticed over the years is when I am part of a production, which is exciting and rare these days, actually there are more expectations. We have to try to produce more for the money that seems to be there, because now there is also the pressure of creating the additional online content as well, which is there to satisfy both the grown-up audience on social platforms and also the younger audience who might be watching on the likes of the YouTube Kids app. We've now got to make more content for less money, which means everybody is stretched.
I'm going to disagree slightly. only in the context of, we say, if anything happened to the BBC. But things are happening to the BBC Children's every year. If you look at the Ofcom reports and reports from government, they're always saying, we should be doing more, we should be doing more, we should be doing more. The BBC cut children's more than they cut any other genre. And that is from a low starting point. One of the big things I want people to take away and try and understand is, like, the children are our future. Every single age group needs a different set of content. Every single age group has a different set of values. And yet we fund them like this one homogenous thing with a tiny pot of money from the BBC, which again, they decrease more hours, they decrease more spend. Why are they not funded proportionally to the adult genre? I don't understand it. I know they don't pay for it, and that's possibly why, because they have to keep trying to get the adults to suck in. And this goes for all platforms, by the way. The children don't fund it, so they go for the adults. But why isn't there a remit that the finding and funding of children's content should get equal public service money? And I don't just mean the BBC, in anything. I could talk about the arts or anything. Why are children not getting proportional funding when they, again, are our future and have the biggest need?
Can I just ask about the Young Adults Content Fund? Because, again, when that was shut down, and that was a non-BBC thing, so that sort of allowed non-BBC things to flourish, it was predicted to be cultural vandalism by Anna Home, who did Jackanory and Grange Hill. So there were lots of doom and gloom. Do you think that should run again? Should there be a recreated sort of fund on YouTube, if necessary?
I think the Young Audience Content Fund was a great statement of intent. It was very good for the industry in terms of profile, raising the idea that these audiences needed funding. I think we never applied to the fund. It was designed to push content into parts that weren't already doing it, so the BBC stepped out of it. I think if you were going to bring it back, it would want to be consistent, not time limited. It would want to be substantial, and it would want to be platform agnostic. So it would be about creating high quality, great content for children, acknowledging paid for, however, by a levy on streamers or indeed on YouTube or whatever, but it would want to have consistency at its heart. It would want to be platform agnostic, but as a statement of intent that these audiences deserve proper content, we as producers will find that money and use it really well if it's available in and every tax credit or fund that is there available for producers. They will find and use.
Speaking as more of an independent content creator here, so I'm in quite a different position to the gents in that my YouTube channel is run by myself, and occasionally I can afford to employ 2 freelancers. That's it. That is the team. The only reason I'm able to fund my YouTube channel is because I am paid elsewhere through theatre, television, books. Otherwise, my channel runs at a loss. So it doesn't really make sense for me to make the videos. I'm just very passionate about getting the content that we make out there because I believe that it's needed, even if it is hard for people to find. But something like a content fund, I would love to be able to apply for, but it's just me. So I could only justify applying for a grant if it was something that wasn't going to take weeks and weeks and months of my time. Otherwise, I'm not sure if it would be helpful. So yeah, the fund would be wonderful, but I think it would be nice to know that it's available to content creators like myself, as well as larger production companies.
Funded by levies like France, Canada and Australia. Do we have good examples of how it runs there? It's had a positive effect there, has it?
I believe it has, yeah.
I think in France in particular it's really strong. The French children's industry is still strong. Canada, the industry is suffering like ours. But I think as an idea, it would work really well. And as Maddie says, if it's available to content creators to make the sort of content that I think we're all talking about, it would be a really strong idea.
But I think you're right in what you say in terms of like being ambitious. I think the original fund was too narrow and wasn't ambitious enough. I think what children need is a sort of transformative change. I think for so long now we've just viewed it as what's left in the pot with money, or the original fund was taken from a bit of money that was left somewhere. It's like, why are we doing that? They're spending this their third biggest influence on their life. School, parents. It's more influential than grandparents now. They're spending more time on it. Why are we investing so little when it's a third of their lives?
Ollie, if Do you think the Department of Education should contribute? I mean, what you're making is really good educational content, all of you. Do you think the Department of Education should contribute to funding good quality educational TV?
That's above my pay grade, but they are all using our content. Yeah. I mean, it's measurable proof they're using it, and there is so much more they can do, especially in inspiring kids with AR and VR and things like that. They did a lesson where their children swam underwater with whales in VR, and their levels of being able to discuss in groups and then articulate that in writing went up dramatically. There are all these things at our fingertips. So yes, it's education, but equally, I feel that, and again, there is evidence coming out around this, that the doom scrolling and the constant dopamine hits of things could be, and I want to say could be because I don't think the evidence is firm, could be changing young children's brains. Mm-hmm. So I think it could be, it could be another obesity crisis waiting to happen if we're changing children's brains. And how do we? So is it a health crisis? Is everyone needs to look at it and say, what are we doing to our children?
Mm. And the sums of money we're talking about, and I know we would all say this, but would be very small in the scheme of things to very high impact potentially. And we're out of horrible histories. We're now doing horrible science, and we have worked with BBC Bite Size and created content specifically around Key Stage 2 science curriculum. It's being used in the 60% of schools now as again, not as a teaching tool, but as back to this point about to inspire, to show a generation a different way of looking at science. So it's being used in schools, as Ollie says. I'm sure all of Ollie's work is being used in schools already.
I honestly believe if the amount of funding that's needed, if the BBC just funded children's proportionally, that would be easily enough, which doesn't seem like a crazy concept to me.
You think we're over-reliant on the BBC for funding, and is it sustainable? We know the BBC Charter Review Green Paper is going to be launched today. Should that be a priority for the Charter?
I kind of think that's like saying, are we over-reliant on the NHS for the health of our children? Because they are the only people, they're public service, it's their remit. As Maddie said, there's no really ITV left, there's no real Channel 4. So they are the people that are doing it. So yes, we're reliant on them. And should there be other mechanisms? Yes. Would some competition be healthy? Yes. But I'm not in the market for saying who funds it, how do we fight to get the funding, and we're taking it off them. And I'm just saying, what do children need? How do we get it to them? And that should be the priority. And you guys are the wheels of power, and you say how you can get it in front of them, finding, and how we can fund it.
Are there any funds available for making YouTube content for children's television?
So because I make science content, I am in a position where I can reach out to organisations, science organisations and institutions who may have grants available. The problem is a lot of these grants are incredibly long-winded. I simply don't have the time to be able to invest that time in applying for those grants. The other thing is a lot of grants that are being made available for the creation of media and STEM content aren't available for kids' content because people are naturally nervous about sponsoring or being seen to be advertising children's content in some way. Which is a shame because actually it's one of the best ways that I can fund my content. I would much rather have my videos be sponsored and have the funding of an educational establishment than I would, let's say, a toy company. So it's a shame, but I think people are quite confused about what is and isn't allowed when it comes to putting money behind children's content. One thing that's really frustrating is that the moment I do have a piece of content that might be sponsored, immediately that video is no longer able to appear on the YouTube Kids app, which is where most of my views will come from. I imagine that's the same for all of us. If you mark a video which is for children and that video is sponsored, it will no longer appear where most children are watching the videos. So actually a sponsored video for me is kind of a bad thing because it means the children who I'm trying to reach aren't going to see it.
Why is that? Why are sponsored videos not seen by children?
Simply because that's the way it is.
Is that the YouTube regulation?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
YouTube Kids regulation, yeah.
Thank you. Cam.
Thanks, Chair. Richard, what's your view on the value of current tax reliefs available for children's programmes and animation?
essential. They work really well. They have become a key part of any form of ambitious children's content, to use Ollie's word, whether that's animation, live action. It currently stands at 39%, and everyone thinks, well, 39%, but actually it's 39% of 80% of your spend, which is then taxed, corporation tax at 25%. So it nets down to around 24% into a budget. But that has become absolutely key to every show we make for children. And even smaller, projects, digital outgrowths of our television programs and so on. We're looking for the tax relief on that, because that gets another 25% into the budget. So it's become absolutely key.
Thank you, Ollie. Anything to
add? So the tax credits are amazing, and inward investment and things like that. But that essentially means we're probably working on US shows. So there's a cultural thing there. It's great for business. Great that we're working on these shows and have business, but a lot of it will come with the US voice, because that's where most of the work's coming from, both TV and film and everything else. The other thing to say is a tax credit is only of any value if someone is spending money, and as we've all just discussed, only the BBC is spending money. So essentially, we're kind of funding the BBC via the tax credit on children's content. So I think it's absolutely essential for us as producers, but I think upping the level of that is only of any value if more people are putting money in the pot to start off with.
Maddie?
It's kind of irrelevant to me, to be honest.
Yeah,
I'm not pulling in any money for the content that I'm making, so no, I don't really have anything to say to them.
And it relates to the previous question about the YAC fund, as it was called, which is credits and funds are only great if they are supplementing money that's already on the table. And that's that you.
I'd love that to be relevant to me, but sadly it's just not.
Doesn't take.
That leads on nicely to the next question, which was going to be, and I'll pitch it to you, Maddie, then. Do you have any ideas whether the tax credit system could be improved for children's TV? Well, children's content.
Children's content, yes. It would be nice if it was something that could be relevant for me, but again, for that to be relevant, I would have to be making money on the content, or have to be drawing money from somewhere for the content that I'm making, which currently isn't there. So yes, but is sort of my answer for that.
Ollie?
I can give you an answer of yes, more, or change some of the rules so we get more. It will all be more. I'd say you have to come back one more step and just say, like, what is right for children, and who is funding that content in the first place. If it's the government through tax credits or more tax credits, great. If it's the BBC through a great proportion, great. If it's health and education, great. But I'm afraid it's all more, because as I said to you, most of our global income comes from YouTube, and it doesn't pay for 20% of the content I make. That's coming from the BBC. Again, that's public money. And again, you can call that license fee money and not government money, but it's funding. It's funding and finding. How do we make them find it as well?
I would just add, I think there is one, obviously an enhancement. It does work. So, in terms of backing a scheme that really works for the producers, I think it would be great. I think an enhancement, and I think you could bring in almost like an additional criteria around British content, British relevance, and British cultural content, which is it's not. So there might be an enhancement or an uplift if there was content that was directly relevant and directly created for British children. I think that would be a simple thing to do, but that would be really effective as a way of pump priming content. Because one of the issues is that the content that is there, and of those 727 hours, or if you go on to YouTube Kids, look at the front page, it's, I would have thought, 90%, 98% North American content.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Also leads me on quite nicely. In your experience, is the UK tax credit regime competitive enough alongside international competitors, if you like?
I don't know the details of the French and Canadian systems, but I think it's there are in adult television, there is a sort of competition. But if you can take your productions around the globe, then there's a very marked competition around tax credit systems. So if you want to shoot in Bulgaria, they'll give you a 30% tax credit. If you want to shoot in Morocco, as we have recently, there'll be a tax credit, a sum that's set aside that you all apply for. But I think it's. In a way, it's a moot point for us, as you know, whether how it compares. It would be great if it was, the higher it is, or the more attractive it is, the better value the children will get in the end in their programming.
Ultimately as well, the children, when they're watching content online, they don't know whether a piece of content has been made by one person or two people or a company of 100 people. They're just watching the videos that they like, which is why I think it's important that any incentive or grants that are made available are available to all content creators, regardless of the size of the company that they might be producing with.
Thank you. Ollie, anything to add?
No. It's just that the value of it is only on what other people are investing in it. So we need to solve that bit more importantly than the tax credit. I'd always ask for more, because I work in the industry, right, so more's good, but you have to have people putting money in the pot.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks, Chair.
Natasha.
Hello, thank you so much for coming in, and on behalf of all parents who lived through COVID, thank you for your content. Saved my life. Just to pick up on some points around the public service broadcasting and someone who had the big TV, and I still to this day remember the Channel 4 schools clock as it counted down to the programme. And talking about prominence and talking about how we need to make sure that content is surfaced because we've all paid for it. Ollie, you've talked about your proposal of a discoverability guarantee. Did you just want to explain what that is a bit?
Yeah, it's a very loose concept because you're trying to bring about 400 people into a room and it's going to be a policy thing. But why can't we, on connected devices or on YouTube or on other providers, just have something that says one of the top 4 things has to be of public service, UK public service value, just one of the top 4 things, and then every so often, because again we know our kids get stuck in silos. I had a child who was stuck in a YouTube algorithm of people stuck in holes and war. I don't quite know how he got it. Probably from horrible history he's got some war. and then stuck in one bedtime he was telling me the name of all the Chilean miner children. I was like, what? He'd been watching it. Great education. But how do we get them to look sideways at the other shiny things? That's what curation on public service used to do. You used to get your Blue Peters, then a fun cartoon, then a drama. And it made you look around the world and see different things. And I think sometimes we lose that. So when I talk about prominence, I mean, why can't there be some rule that there's something that gives them a chance of seeing the good stuff? Just a little opportunity, and then within that, a little opportunity to glance sideways at something else good.
Would you see that working just with PSBs, or would it be more that kind of high quality content from other providers as well?
Well, this is the golden. It goes back to the what is good content thing. Is how is there AI good enough that can pick the good stuff from the bad stuff, or does there have to be a human element in categorising this stuff? Because as you said, I think it would take something like 1 million people 5 years to even sort of keep up with what's going on YouTube. So how are we going to define that for any platform? What is the good stuff? Does it have to come with a public service badge from either an organisation, be it the BFI certification on cultural, or a new organisation running a new fund, or does it come with a BBC thing? Are the BBC guaranteed it? Are ITV guaranteed it if they do more for kids? I don't know, but there has to be a way, has to be an effective way of labelling it, which I know the Children's Media Foundation are sort of trying to work on at the moment.
And there is, there is precedent, I think, because I think during COVID, as I understand it, YouTube, because of the of children not being able to go to school, made educational content more discoverable and promoted that. So there is a precedent. YouTube has got a precedent for that. And if you were then to be able to layer a British high quality, quality, whether it's PSBs or not, on top of that. But we are in this conundrum of there is more content than ever, but it's almost narrower than ever and shallower than ever. So you can end up, as you say, in very, very deep holes. So some form of discoverability led, I think, would work.
I think what children are finding is narrow, but I think this isn't meant to be like a not YouTube session.
No, exactly.
YouTube. All the information's there. It's all
exactly,
there. It's
exactly.
there. can you find it? Can I find it?
Yeah, it's that. Sorry, it's just that thing. Just last time I mentioned horrible histories. There are 15 sort of half hours of horrible histories. That's a huge amount of effort goes into that. Goes out into this sea of nearly 1 million hours of YouTube content being uploaded to the day, and it ebbs away. It's going to ebbs away. So it's how do you work with some of them where that will be.
Is there some sort of like kite mark or something that we could come up with British?
We talked about British content, British high quality, British quality kite mark.
Yeah, but even if there was a kite mark that any of us could apply for and get our content marked with the equivalent of a red tractor or something, that would be great. But it still doesn't change the fact that YouTube, for example, and a lot of video platforms are driven by algorithms. So just because something is marked with sort of like a seal of approval, if a child is watching things about holes, or maybe they are really into tractors, then they're just going to see tractors. So that kite mark needs to work alongside a slightly adjusted algorithm, which is going to promote variety.
I mean, YouTube's own standards are, when they're trying to bring up their own standard, they're talking about what their own policy. So if that policy also includes that it needs to, the kite mark includes adhering to that policy, then you would think it would surface higher up in the algorithm than other things.
I also think we allow YouTube into every British home. We allow our children, it's almost free of charge. There it is as a platform. As you say, this is not YouTube. YouTube's an extraordinary thing, and everything is there. But we do allow them that right just to carry on. And there is a conversation to be had about how we decide what we want our children to be watching.
And on that, Ollie, you've talked about having a UK hub of content, to kind of a platform that brings it all together. And you mentioned earlier around your sort of, your parenting choices of saying, go and watch iPlayer. I kind of do the same thing. I've kind of said to my youngest son, you have to watch iPlayer. Even Netflix, I feel, is a better choice because at least the programs have a beginning, middle and end, and you can kind of move away. So how would you envisage a kind of UK hub of content working, and how realistic is that to?
Well, I think my UK hub idea, it's not a new one. It's been mooted before, but the idea of that was to again probably slightly classify what UK public service content, so it sits within a thing, and then we've identified what that thing is that we want children to watch, and then maybe that is your kite marking. I can't remember the name of the old plan that was going to bring everything in under what?
Seesaw or like kangaroo?
Kangaroo, yeah. So I kind of feel like that boat has possibly sailed. But I think what I was trying to talk about is somewhere where if a parent wants to go, they can go there. Now it could be the iPlayer. Everyone could put their stuff within the thing on iPlayer. So if a parent really wants to, they can go there. But more than that, it establishes what we are trying to get children to watch. Because what we're trying to describe is a diet. And then you can look at a supermarket, and you guys have to set the boundaries. So I can give my child £100 and send him into the supermarket and say, do whatever you want. He's coming out with £100 worth of Haribo. I can go in there with him and say, you have to get some meals for the family as well. Well, we're going to get a tin of instant something and a lot of Haribo. I as a parent can be really precise and say you need to do something healthy, and then he has to look for that. He's still coming out with some Haribo. Or like we did in supermarkets, we can say, well, move the Haribo. Move it from where the child can see it, and they can see some vegetables. So it's your guys' job to establish, not to say you can't have sweets. No one's going to say you can't have sweets, are they, Bug? But you have to say here are the vegetables, and this is why it's important. And we have to understand how important it is.
So I was going to just go on to you, Maddie, because you're, kind of one of the first sort of like digital native brands. Essentially, you've had to go cross-platform to talk about how you make an income, and so just sort of wanting to understand a bit more about, well, as a we were talking about Bagpuss, we were talking about all these brands that we remember growing up, and we do have I don't think we have lost that necessarily, because if you think about Bluey, or you think about Blippy, or you think about yourself, these global brands still exist, but you're having to be in so many different places to kind of make an income. So just to explain your experience a little bit about how you've had to bring that all together.
make it work sort of financially. So I actually started out making science and natural history videos on YouTube for various different companies, BBC Earth being one of them. I worked for various technology companies, but I quickly realised that if I wanted to meet my own audience and grow a community, then I had to have my own channel. So I started making my own content, and I sort of started to take that more seriously when the CBeebies job with Do You Know came along. So naturally I found that the small YouTube audience I did have, it suddenly changed overnight. Suddenly I had families with preschoolers watching my content, so I made sure that the videos I was making on YouTube were appropriate for the same age group. And it's been really important that I've maintained that this entire time. As long as I have a presence on the BBC, I find that the highest search terms on my YouTube channel are simply my name, which means that people don't go onto YouTube and look for my YouTube videos. They're just looking for Maddie branded stuff. And quite often I'll meet families who'll say, oh, I love your video about candy canes, or oh, I love your video, you know, the one with the bees. Their assumption is that that's BBC content. It's not. Those are videos that have been made by myself or by my small team, but to the audience they're one and the same. So it's really important that I make sure I instill the same values in the content that I make away from the BBC, with the same values that would be applied, you know, with public service funding.
Something more around how YouTube is monetising and I say compensating, say, the BBC for its content, because it's a unique ecosystem that's being created here. Your views are being driven by the BBC because it's giving you a platform, but then the content on the BBC is getting more views because it's being surfaced on YouTube. So there's a relationship here. Perhaps YouTube need to compensate the BBC a bit more for the content it's providing.
I will say, though, the majority of my views are actually from, actually it's 50-50, so a lot of my views come from the US, 50% come from the UK, and that's the same with any YouTube channel. It's an international viewership. I don't know if the BBC getting more funding would impact my YouTube views. It's really, really hard for me to say that.
And then just thinking about, you mentioned this earlier around if you're sponsored, you don't get money because it's marked as made for kids.
Yes.
Just explain a little bit about that categorisation and what happens to your content when it's
so when you're uploading a video to YouTube, if you are making a video that is made for children, meaning the intended sole audience are children, you're speaking directly to them, you should mark that video as made for kids. That will hopefully mean it ends up in the YouTube Kids app, although that's not always guaranteed, but hopefully it will mean that it will go there. When it's in the YouTube Kids app, you won't have any comments on it. There's no sort of social aspect at all. Equally, if you mark a video as made for kids and you watch it on the main YouTube for grown-ups if you like, comments are also removed. Any videos that are watched through the YouTube Kids app do not receive any money through AdSense, through adverts at all. So you might have a video, 90% of your views could be coming from the YouTube Kids app. You've not made any money on that. Those 90% of views, you don't see any of it at all. You're just hoping that the 10% might draw you a bit of cash from Google AdSense. But because your channel at this point is being seen as a channel for children, you're not worth anything to Google adverts. So the money that you do make on the 10% of views that might come from the main channel is minuscule. If I was making lifestyle videos, makeup videos, videos about finance or gaming, the money I would make per view or per 1,000 views would be way higher. But because I'm making educational content for families, some of which are specifically for children, my AdSense is very, very low. Very low, because I'm not worth anything to the advertisers.
I think what Maddie's saying in a way is I'm going to use the royal you, that it's kind of your fault. And I'll explain that. It's because you're very good. You're very good at shutting things down that are harmful, and so you should be. So every time the fast food thing, brilliant, you shut it down. Didn't replace it with anything, so we lost our money. COBA, protecting child's data, very good, shut it down, didn't replace the money. We lost, I think it was 70% of our YouTube revenue overnight with that. We didn't replace anything. So we're essentially defunding everything, not only the bad stuff, we're defunding the good stuff. And you guys, as you should be, shut it down, but you've never thought about well, how's that? What are we replacing that with now? And it never has been. The amount of money we can access from anyone has just decreased so much, and the BBC have decreased with it, and they've, it's justified. They've lost numbers of children, they've lost licence fee, but I don't think it's ever been thought. The original BBC budget for children's was some leftover money, and I think it still is leftover money. We need transformational change, saying what is this doing to our children, and how do we best serve them through school, through at home.
I just finally, would you maybe think, say you you had a magic wand and you could reverse the high fat sugar content block on kids' stuff, and obviously I don't advocate advertising that stuff to kids, maybe taking that revenue and investing it directly into kids' content and kids' lifestyle things is a better way of...
Well, number one, exactly that, and here's a policy you could bring in. If the social media platforms who are pushing out this content, as well as we mentioned YouTube a lot, we shouldn't be. There's lots of different platforms. Yeah. If they are pushing out harmful stuff for children, we're seeing fines, and we're seeing poor content. Some of my content gets ripped off and rude words get put up, and there's advertising against that. Someone's making money from that. If they're making money from it, or they're not serving children, or they're damaging children, and the governments are fining them, which is beginning to happen in some countries, and there's obviously the ban in Australia. If that's happening, put that money into children's, give it back to children so they can use it.
Something that we haven't touched on, which I'd just quite like to add, is that when we're talking about children's content here, I feel like a lot of the time the discussion is reserved for preschool content. And actually there is a healthy, if not too much, preschool content available through the likes of the YouTube Kids app. There are so many channels out there who are making nursery rhyme videos or learn your ABCs or whatever that might be. I know, for example, myself and Horrible Histories, we're making videos for this sort of forgotten age group, especially online, who are sort of your 6 to 10s and 12s. Because at this age, these children, they feel a little bit too grown up for the YouTube Kids app, which sort of presents itself as quite young. But equally, they're not necessarily watching TV with their parents. These are alpha children who expect their content to be social. They expect it to be interactive. They want to have some autonomy over it. However, there is nowhere for them to go. And these kids, they end up watching gaming videos. They end up playing, Roblox, for example, to get that type of feedback they expect. It's really hard for us making videos for this age group, 6 to 12, because there's so little of it, because it is not financially viable to make, because the kids don't know where to find us. So it would be wonderful if there was some way that we could try to encourage and again sort of like help lift up content for this age group, because at the moment they don't really have any way of being recognised online.
Vulnerable age as well, because you're kind of going into that pre-teen, getting into those doing barriers before you even started kind of.
There's nowhere safe.
And there's nowhere safe, and there's nowhere for parents. Ollie said nowhere to point your children and say, actually, this is it, or to create some guardrails. So we're saying sort of by the time you get to 6, 7, you've got to access to your own device. It's the sort of Wild West, which is pretty,
Thank you very much, Hyatt.
Thank you, Chair. Maddie, I just wanted to come back to, I suppose, your experience and your journey in terms of sort of your content sort of creation, and in terms of your international counterparts. I know what you do is unique, but in terms of your international sort of counterparts, do you see their sort of, what's their experience with regards to sort of their craft and support within their sort of host countries? Do you see any different? Do you see any difference in sort of treatment, sort of monetising, that kind of thing?
In terms of my international counterparts, I'll be honest, there aren't many of us. I know an awful lot of people who have YouTube channels that are being fronted by humans that are making preschool content. They are finding ways to make that financially viable, because they can churn out an awful lot of it quite quickly, and they're able to use quantity to enable them to get enough views to be able to drive some AdSense. A lot of these creators are also relying on sources of income outside of YouTube. So a lot of them have their own communities. They might be using platforms such as Patreon, where you can encourage your audience to almost like give you little tips if they want to. It's completely sort of up to your audience. or they're selling merchandise through the grown-ups as well. So that's how they're making it work. But for that to work, you need to have a massive audience in the first place. In terms of channels that are ran by, just a few people like myself who are making videos for that sort of 6 to 12, I can count us on maybe like 2 hands in the UK. So there's not really many people for me to measure myself against, to be honest, because it's just not financially viable at the moment to make the sort of content that I'm making.
Okay, and just final bit, do you see any sort of growth on, you said there's not sort of many sort of comparables, but do you see any sort of international changes, anything sort of on the horizon that you are sort of aware of, or you can...
There were more options in the US for STEM creators but recent administration stripped a lot of that. So this year in particular has been pretty bad for STEM creators and my peers who live in the States. They didn't really exist in the UK. Not that I'm aware of anyway. I'm not saying they don't exist, but not that I'm aware of.
Brilliant, thank you. Richard, do you want to come in on that? Or?
I just want to add that, again, people play the algorithm, so different things will be important on YouTube at certain points, and YouTube are trying to update their policy, so it has to be educational. A lot of that is you self-select what you are, and then you tend to get a lot of noise and shouting, which feels like people dressed up as teachers rather than an actual decent pedagogy to everything and a decent... So there are sort of people play the algorithms, but it still tends to be quite shouty, quite repetitive, and usually says like and subscribe at the end of it, which is really annoying.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Bio. Jeff, please.
Thanks. I think Ollie, you said earlier, all the info's there, it's about finding it. Now, how did you guys get your stuff out there? Is the success of Ollie Number Blocks and Richard Horrible Histories, is that because your brand is already established? Could you work without that established brand, do you think?
No. Okay. I couldn't have funded it. In fact, I'll go one stage further than that. Forget YouTube. We started making the Alphablock shows 15, 16 years ago. Without the BBC, we couldn't have funded it. They are unique in this world, and for all their faults, and they got our session cancelled last time, so we've had to go again. But they are unique in the world, and we can't forget what that uniqueness does for children. We wouldn't be talking about all this stuff if it wasn't for them. No one else was willing to fund the block shows. Even now, we struggle to get it on broadcasters around the world because they're like, oh, it's a bit too educationally for the ones that just want to do entertainment. Oh, it's a bit too entertainmenty for the ones that want to do strict education. They're kind of missing the trick of the BBC, which is they have a pot of money where they can really try and experiment stuff and do these things. So absolutely not. Without the BBC, we would have been nowhere.
Interestingly, we started Horrible Histories at around the same time as Number Blocks, and I say always, there is no other broadcaster in the world that would have taken that risk. I mean, who would have thought you could make a TV comedy series about factually accurate history and that would somehow connect, and also take a few pot shots at kings and queens and along the way. And they took a risk. They backed it fully. They allowed it to grow and to establish. So we're now into series 12. They supported us in this kind of the Britishness of it. And again, to one of the answers to funding has always been go find funding elsewhere. If you go find funding elsewhere, then you end up making content that appeals to a sort of global child as opposed to a British child. So they backed it. They took risks. It was quite edgy. One of the secrets of it is that it's pokes fun at power. And it's a bit scatological and it's a bit anti-authoritarian. But I think that comes through, and the BBC backed it. And I think if we're 15 years old, if we were starting now, there's no way they'd be able to take that risk. So all of the outgrowings of that would go. And we know that thousands of youngsters have gone on to study history at university as a result. Had a young girl, 10-year-old, said to me, I got a mark at school because they said, do I know anything about the suffragettes? And I went up and I told her the difference between the suffragettes and the suffragists and at school and about Millicent Fawcett and Emmeline Pankhurst. And that, when you get it right, what the impact can be. But I think the problem now is there's less money, and the appetite for risk is less. And as I say, we'd be asked to go and find co-production with other partners around the world, and then you wouldn't end up with something as singular.
And then there's the how much do we play the YouTube game? So with my content, it's like they're very, very structured, and they're 5 minutes of like precise, entertaining education. If I have to play it's a moral dilemma every day for me. How much do I make my content more shouty to try and compete? We really work hard to balance it out. Mm-hmm. So, but there was a recent report actually just come out which said broadcasters are now moving their content towards that. And they said it in a kind of a positive way of like, oh, they're going to be able to compete because they're doing that. But I was thinking, oh gosh, yeah, isn't that a bit of a shame that we are now having to play that game to get children the good stuff?
No surprise that sort of one of the big shows that's come back now is Gladiators. Again, that's come back. It was established some time ago. We're also delighted to be bringing back Balamory. I don't know if anyone remembers Balamory. We've been filming on the island of Mull. But again, that's come back because it was 20 years ago, and it's a pre-established brand. So the idea of starting something new, an ambitious new idea for children at this moment in time would be very, very hard.
Other countries do have better development funds as well. That's one thing we could look at, because better development funds and sort of seed money to get going. That's where the the content fund, whatever it was called, that's what it was very good at. It was useful at getting people going. As an established business, I would happily not access that fund because I'll develop it myself with my money. But there are people that need that money to get these good ideas over the first step.
Yeah. So that was development all those years ago. So your colleague, Ollie, Nathan Wilkes, sent us in some evidence where he said, and I'm quoting, "There's no viable funding pathway for high-quality, educational, UK-made, YouTube-first content." Yeah, and he described it as a structural crisis. How do we address it?
That's absolutely spot on. He's a brilliant lad, and he's trying to do his own project, totally public service, to do with his upbringing and his part of British culture. But he's struggling. We try and support artists in our studio with various programs, help them write picture books, help them try and tell their story. But we're a tiny thing, and we can't get enough impetus on YouTube. Even I think we've got something like the 5th biggest channel in Europe, but even with our impetus there, we can't help everyone. And he looks around, he says, well, who's helping me? How can I get that to grow? So he's perfectly right. For him, it's like it feels for him BBC or nothing, and the BBC at the moment can't do everything they should do, and again they can never do everything.
We talk about market failure. We tend to talk in television about niches, that certain niches are not being... We're talking here about market failure for a whole generation.
Yeah. So what can we do?
So,
I'm going to sound like Greg Charles now, who you've already met, of saying funding and find that, get those two things sorted, and get the importance of it sorted out in everyone's brain. Let everyone know that it is... All parents know the battle of turn the iPad off, turn the phone off, do something else. So if they're on those things, there'd be slightly less of a battle if you knew they were getting good things. There'd be slightly less of a battle. My own children, this is why I just want to mention games as well, learn every flag in the world from FIFA. They know, honestly, we play it at Christmas, name the flag. The adults cannot beat them. And then from that, they then want to know where the countries are. And you buy them a map and they put the flag on it. Call of Duty, the beach landings in Normandy. If you got a 14-year, if you made that curriculum, if that's curriculum, the beach landings, and you did an entire level that taught them everything from the date to how long it took, you could do the whole curriculum, and they would sit and they would play on that and they would learn it. I once presented that idea to someone from government, and they said, yes, of course, but we can't have people shooting each other with guns. I was like, you're teaching the war syllabus. There are guns. There are ways and methods through games, through our content, through immersing themselves in these worlds that children can learn better. We have to establish the importance of that. Then you guys have to work out what level of importance that is in money and provide it.
Yeah, and the funding seems to be there's the point Ollie was making about the proportions within the BBC. That's a conversation. There's the YouTube the access YouTube are getting essentially for free. What is there something there that around? Is there a fund? Is that fund a government education or health fund? But there are different blocks. I mean, there's a tax credit, but it seems to me that it is as existential as we've been describing it in a way. But there is, what we do know is there's incredible creative talent in this country that wants to make children's content. One of the things that we found was we have no shortage. People come off feature films, big feature films, to come and work on our shows because they love it, because they've got children. They want to work on something that they feel is good for their children. And then the halo effect, as we know of children's television, your father, with Russell T Davies, Sally Wainwright, my first conversation to get me into television was with a chap called Anthony Minghella. He's the only person I knew, and he was the script editor on Grange Hill. And he went on to win multiple Oscars. Simon Farnaby, who came through Horrible Histories to Stupid Deaths, if anyone would know, he now writes the Paddington movies and Wonka movies. Huge British exports about British culture. So it's sort of, there are so many areas in which children's television is like a wellspring, not just for children's lives, but for our creative health in this country.
Something I would like to see, money aside, yes please, that's an absolute guarantee. We'd love there to be some sort of funds available, is that I would like to see us working with platforms such as YouTube to find a way to make sure that parents, adults can set up these apps in a way that means the apps and the algorithm will favour specific types of content. It might be that this has to be geotagged to something that you can do just within the UK, for example. But I would like parents to be able to go into an app and be able to favour specific channels that may have some type of kite mark, or they may already know about because they're brands they recognise from television. But that will come with a level of education. Parents are already completely overwhelmed about how they're supposed to be setting up their tech or their internet at home. I think some sort of hub or just place where parents can go and just see a list of channels that are recommended or have been approved by some sort of body that are appropriate for different age groups.
Or it comes preset and you have to turn it off.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That would be nice. I just think, the app at the moment, for example, the YouTube Kids app, you can set it up in different age categories. I'd like there to be something that was clearer. There is, but it's not across everywhere you use it, where you can personalise it a bit more. But if you're going to be able to personalise an app or turn off an algorithm on an app, for example, parents need to know what their choices are, and at the moment they don't even know what the choices are because they're overwhelmed.
The framework is in place on YouTube Kids in terms of you have to fill out as a parent, can fill out an age group thing. Why isn't there a sort of a kite, some sort of kite mark?
Just a little word of sanity though. After the age of 6, are children on the YouTube Kids app, or are they
on YouTube?
And I think I'm always told that YouTube don't know, but I suspect you guys might be able to ask them, and you might get how many children are actually viewing for there, how many are on the main channel, and if they are all on the main channel, how are we protecting them on the main channel?
And to what extent are you confident that those sort of improvements for finding good quality content on YouTube could be done voluntary, or would then there need to be some form of legislation to kind of trigger that?
I'd love to think that the people at YouTube and the other platforms kind of understand that they have won in a way, and that they have the eyeballs, and with the eyeballs comes responsibility. And I would much rather they sat down with the government and said, and didn't go down the Australia route of like, we'll just shut everything down. Because we know where that leads. I've told you where that leads. That leads to less money and less content. Rather they sat down with you and said, here's a sensible compromise. That means you can find the good stuff. It's one thing. Here's how they look sideways. We're going to guarantee you there's no video nasties on here. Here's how we're going to verify kids' age. And maybe even like, here's the extra amount of money we will give to children's producers because we know that it's not the same environment as... So we're willing to make a little bit less money on the kids' things because we know it's our duty as human beings. I'd like to think they would do that.
Yeah. I mean, they already have high quality principles there themselves. The Kids app does favour content with these high quality principles, but whether something is high quality, well, that's kind of up for debate.
Yeah, who's judging?
Just because something is glossy and well made doesn't it mean you necessarily want your child to watch 10 episodes of it in a row, for example. It's tricky. YouTube obviously wants the person watching it to have the best experience as possible and watch as much of it as possible. If you start to pick and choose what a child can and can't watch, a child will know. Again, they're a young generation where they're used to having autonomy, used to having choice. It's, I think, creating a space that feels interactive but has variety but is still engaging and fun for a child is really important.
Okay.
Thanks.
Maddie, I'm absolutely fascinated in terms of the not making money from it. So in terms of if you were paid the advertising revenues that were the full revenues, would you end up making money?
Hard to say because I don't have the data to tell me that either way. I've never made that much money in terms of AdSense. My click per 1,000 views has always been low because I have made content for families and children. It's educational. So it means that advertisers are less inclined to put their adverts on my videos because people are very unlikely to click through because they're younger. So I don't necessarily have the information. But when I compare my videos to other STEM creators, for example, there's a great community of STEM communicators in the UK. When I see what they're getting per 1,000 views and I compare it to what I'm getting, the difference is vast. So yes,
that evidence is out there though.
Yes.
I mean, we were working pre and post, and it's about 60-70% up to 80% of revenue lost in that one decision, and that one day the COBA rules came in. Yeah. That's how dramatic that was. I would be nearly making enough money to fund the content if those rules hadn't been brought in. Nearly, but not quite. Still need the BBC.
Yeah, I think there was we've moved from a moment where we thought YouTube was the answer to all the funding problems, which is what people thought. You go on YouTube, become a success like Maddie, and then you're endless riches. Or to Ollie's point, just paying for the content. But we've discovered that millions of views of our shows turn into small thousands of pounds when they cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to make.
It's lovely that you say success. I really appreciate that. But my channel only has about 330,000 subscribers, which for YouTube kids content creators is really quite small in the large scheme of things. And just because I have a lot of subscribers, 300,000, they've been accumulated over 10 years of grafting on YouTube, doesn't mean my videos are getting the same amount of views. My views on my videos are going down every single time I upload because they're becoming harder and harder to be discovered. I cannot keep up with the quantity and the consistency that the algorithm requires for my channel to be successful. I would have to hugely lower my standards for video content if I wanted to keep up. A lot of people now are relying on cut downs of previous content. Especially when it comes to shorts, you can churn out a lot of shorts just by making cut downs of previous videos, or compilations, which might be 4-hour videos of your previous videos back to back. These are all ways that you can keep your channel active and try to encourage new subscribers. They're techniques that we all use. But again, this is just more content out there that isn't original. It's not unique.
Also, there's no real rules on uploading that content. No. So Maddie will be getting less views directly as a result of people uploading AI videos that a human hand has had no, other than type in a thing, makes your video, upload it. And it's not that the kids are really interested in that video, but if you do it enough and have enough of that, then even diverting 100 clicks to the infinite amount of AI that's going on there diverts clicks away from Maddie's great content to something that a child gets no value of. And I think what Maddie doesn't say is, while she's saying I've only got that many, all it would take her was to inspire 10 children from the UK to go through science, go to university and discover the answer to perpetual motion or something incredible. And the value of what Maddie does is worth infinitely more than those things that are just getting mindless millions and millions.
I've had to completely change sort of what success online means to me. And for me, if I've had, just 10 views, but each of those views actually might be a classroom full of children. It's really difficult for me to know how many people are actually watching my videos, because they are watched by entire families, multi-generational families. They're watched in assemblies or in classrooms. So 10 views could actually mean 400, I don't know. So that's one thing, but also I'm much more interested in the impact that my videos are making. It has to be more important that a video about, trying to find fossils on a beach has encouraged a family to go hunting for sharks' teeth themselves. That has to mean more than just lots and lots and lots of views, because those views could, if I was taking the easy route, I could take the shortcuts and I could get the views, but I don't want to. I stubbornly refuse.
We're right behind you. Let's have Liz, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I really agree with Ollie's point about Call of Duty. I'm a former Xbox ambassador, so I absolutely get that. And also, Horrible Histories awakened my own son's love of history, so thank you for that. And Maddie mentioned creating content for the forgotten age group, and I wonder, Richard, if you could just say what you think is the secret of Horrible History's success.
So I've sort of mentioned, I think when we started, we knew we were not starting in a vacuum, because Terry Deer had written the books. In fact, it was my son's passion for those books that got us going. He said, "Dad, you make all this posh history with Mary Beard and those things. Why don't you make Horrible Histories into a series?" So I knew that it connected with that. He was then 10 years old. And Terry had set something in those, which is the tone of the programs, which I think really spoke to this age group that we're talking about, hard to reach. It's the humour's a bit naughty, it feels a bit anti-authoritarian and whatever. But he also understood something else, which is kids like to know stuff. Knowledge is empowering. Being able to share knowledge is empowering. One of the proudest statistics we have from Horrible Histories is that the BBC does research, 60% of kids talk about the show with their peers. So he was onto something. I think it's the tonality, the fact that we think really carefully about the kids. It's got a British sensibility in terms of its comedy, but also British history. I think that specificity is really appealing to kids. I think it's silly. It's memorable, it's repeatable, it's watchable again and again. And then we got, as I said, some of the best people in British comedy to work on it, because they had kids and wanted to work on something worthwhile. But I think also what we went on a bit of a journey, because we started off with sort of low-hanging fruit of what was just silly, like Aeschylus being killed by an eagle dropping a tortoise on his head, a stupid death. And we started with what you would think of as obvious 10-year-old boy fare. And we ended up, we've done episodes on the Magna Carta. We've done episodes on the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. We've done a 75th, one of the most popular anniversary of the NHS episode about the founding of the NHS, Horrible Histories. And what we've realised is, in a way, the more densely we pack it. The Monarch's Song, for instance, which is a song of all the kings and queens of England, I think you could probably go around pretty much every school in the country and find kids who would be able to sing to the Monarch's Song, which is a sort of rip-off of Chas and Dave. I think they won't know who Chas and Dave is, but they might know who every king and queen of England is. So I think it's got something of that, the tonality, the people behind the camera that work on it and on camera, but also I think we've talked a lot about YouTube, but I think there's something very British about it, in a tradition that of how we think about our past. And from 1066 to Blackadder and Monty Python. But I also think that I think there's something in the fact that that youngsters want things. They want to. It's got a lot of joy in it as well, and they want to laugh, and they also want things they can share and talk about with their friends. And one of the things, again, about that we've come back to is how do you create those moments of shared experience? And that was, I think that's a really powerful piece of it, that they send memes, they can sing the songs to each, do their versions of the songs and so on. So, we knew we knew we hit something when we got a request from Cambridge University. Could they use one of the lines from the song I'm a Knight in their medieval history exam at Cambridge University, which kind of meant that they knew that the students would know what it was, but it also meant the professors knew what it was. So.
I think that's, and your question was why was Horrible History so successful for children, for that age group? But actually I think one of the reasons for its success, and something that I know I try to emulate, is that the content doesn't patronise or alienate anybody. Actually, it's great for families, it's great cross-generational co-viewing. And I think that is, it's one of the reasons why Gladiators has been so successful, because the whole family can watch it together.
And if you guys are at the wheels of power, so you could solve this, and then in 2060, when you're making Horrible Histories, you'll have done something so exceptional you could feature in an episode. So do remember that as you're trying to solve the problems here.
No, but it is. I think it sits there as an example of what one example. Very lucky to work on it of what can happen if you get the formula right and the impact. And we talked about some of the others that had impacted on our life. And I think one of the things that we are all committed to doing is trying to work out the recipe. And I realise it's not easy to how we can continue to make programmes that have impact and scale and speak to our kids.
How important do you think it is for children's TV to tell British stories so that British kids can see their stories on screen?
I think sort of more and more important in terms of making sense of the world. And we haven't talked about the whole social cohesion piece of children's television and how actually how we live in very fractured times and the world seems really confusing and difficult for young people. And I think so making sense of it from their perspective, and that's all British children, not so we work really hard to make sure that Horrible Histories is as inclusive as possible. But I think the British piece is important because it's endangered. I would have said, I would have maybe 15, 20 years ago, I would have said less important, but I think now it's really important. I think it feels like seeing British accents on TV, young British actors, people like yourselves, is really powerful. And the Balamory project we've done, which is Balamory, bringing back Balamory, which is all about community, kindness and friendship will get the problem solved or get the job done. I think those things are becoming more and more important. So yes, I think British understanding the world from where we are is good and endangered, and I think so. I've that part of what we do has become more important rather than less important.
And I think it's a blessing and a curse that we share a common language with the biggest producer of media in the world, America, because number one, it means it gives us access to a lot more, but then it means I don't think we take seriously enough our own cultural and social cohesion. Places like France and Germany will invest more because they want things in their own language and their own, they see the language as part of the culture and getting their content. I think sometimes we're just a little bit lazy and go, well, we've got all this stuff that's in English, we can understand it. So
From a mental health perspective as well, this is very much an opinion, but when we were younger, we would compare ourselves to our left and right, and we would, see people who we might have been in classrooms with. You would go on telly and you might sort of, see other children on Grange Hill or Byker Grove, and that gave you some comparison. But these days, if children are going, to various video platforms, they're comparing themselves to children all over the world. These might be children with extraordinary amounts of money who are living in Los Angeles, making daily vlogs of their family. If you're not seeing yourself on screen, then you're comparing yourself to just this enormous pond that is so overwhelming for young children. I think it's really important that they see themselves represented on screen, not just British voices and accents, but actually themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Grange Hill and Byker Grove. Do you think there's any scope for bringing those programmes back?
I think, to the point, I think it would be take a real effort of will. I think it would be fantastic to do that. I think that BBC has just created something called Crompton for the young adult age group, which has done well and won awards. But I think bringing back those, the question, I think then we come back to Ollie's point now, the world of children's television has changed. We came back as a cohort and sat down and watched them, or our kids sat down and watched them. I think it would be very hard to to land a new brand, it might be you could bring back Grange Hill and Biker Grove, and then show it on primetime TV, and then it might have.
I think with the right amount of money and investment. So if you think of the schools programs that have done well recently, and I know that it's my In-Betweeners and Dairy Girls.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're too extreme for our audience, but our audience are gravitating towards them because there isn't that thing that sits at the sort of horrible history level here. And I think it can be done. I think it's hard, but I think it can be done. But you have to treat them as adults. Yeah. It costs money and it takes funding to do things that high quality.
And I also think we need to resist the argument that somehow the world wouldn't be interested then. So one of the great hits of the year, Adolescence on Netflix for the adult, is set in Rochdale, in a school in Rochdale. It's as specific as you come, and that was the #1 show in India. So the idea, I think, specificity and kind of being and cultural, is a positive. But yeah.
I think as well, it's really easy for us to sit here and be nostalgic about programs that were successful when we were young and we thought they were good for us. But actually, this is a new generation with new ideas.
What's the next?
If we were to bring back Biker Grove, great, it has a name, it means it would resonate with parents. But the reality is Biker Grove these days might actually look better as a vlog series that would sit better in non-linear sort of narrative in short form online. So actually, I think we need to consider what the audience are watching now, not what we thought was good, and try to bring that back, because the world of media has just completely changed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, can I thank all of our panel for joining us today? The songs of the song of Charles II has been going around in my head ever since you sat in front of us, Richard. So thank you for that today. It's like this sort of the drumbeat to the back of my mind for the last hour and a half. And thank you for all the content that you make for our young audiences. You guys are really exceptional in terms of how you help develop the adults of the future. So we're really grateful for your time today and for everything you do in your professions. We're going to just take a quick break while we bring in the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Back to our second panel for this morning, and for this panel we want to address one of the main issues raised in the submissions that we've received, and that is how to pay for good quality children's TV and video content. To help us shed some light on this particularly thorny issue, we are joined by Jackie Edwards, who's the former head of BFI Young Audiences Content Fund, by John McVay, OBE, the Chief Executive of Pact, which is the trade body for the independent TV production sector, and by Adam Minns, the Executive Director of COBA, which is the industry body for commercial broadcast and on-demand services. Thank you all for joining us this morning. John, I'm going to start with you because you've appeared in front of the Select Committee before. You're an old hand.
I've appeared in front of many Select Committees.
Yes, well there we are then. In which case you can be our first witness. In your evidence, you said, we're concerned that many, I'm not going to do the accent, we're concerned that many of the traditional policy solutions put forward will not be enough to address the structural changes in the market and ongoing concerns of the children's production sector. What are the traditional policy solutions that won't be enough?
Well, clearly the policy interventions we've seen, obviously the BBC is an intervention in the market, and we also have tax credits, and then we had the Young Audience Content Fund, which were they're sort of specific interventions in the market to try and sustain original British children's content. Even if we still had the Young Audience Content Fund, and I wish we still did, the actual cumulative total isn't enough to actually deliver the volume of the content to the quality that's needed. And there's a number of reasons for that. The BBC is probably about spending the same amount on children's content now that it did about 6 years ago, but it's many, many less hours because of inflationary costs. It means that we're making less programming, but at the same cost. And in real terms, the actual value of BBC investment in children's content has gone down just because inflation is eating our lunch, like for everyone. So that means that there's less investment. The monies that the BBC will pay in order to finance children's programming has gone down per programme, so how much they put in, what's called the licence fee, has gone down. And the market, for where we would normally go, Richard would go and maybe raise money in the market, has also changed, and there's less money available in the market. So that was one of the reasons for the Young Audience Content Fund, was to try and help close the financing of shows, of British shows, that could then get made and get to market and get to their audiences. There has been significant structural change in the market post-COVID, where the money available for key genres has declined, which means that Richard may get a commission to make a show for the BBC. The BBC can only pay him X%. He's got to raise the money, but getting that money has now got harder, which means it takes longer. And of course, the longer it takes to raise the money in order to make the show, inflation has just made it more expensive by the time you get there. So we're in I think the children's programming has always been the canary in the coal mine for British original content, but we're now seeing those same characteristics across all British programming. So children's has sort of sadly led the way, where we're actually seeing it becoming harder and harder to sustain investment into PSB-funded original content. The BBC is the only game in town, and they need to put more money in. We would like to see an enhancement of the tax credit with the specific cultural test that we got introduced on the enhanced film tax credit, in order to try and help close the finance so that shows can get made, because there's no point getting a commission if you can't raise the money to make the show and get it to the kids or to the audiences. So that's why we think that it's going to be a combination of things that will help sustain the future of children's content. But if we leave it as it is, and I thought Ollie was throwing the ball back in your court, if we leave it as it is, we are managing decline, not only in children's, but across nearly all genres in British television.
Okay, so Adam, where would you like to see the government, or if would you like to see the government act in this? What meaningfully can the government do to shift the dial on this?
Well, I would like to set out, so I think slightly controversially, I'm going to tell you that there's actually more money in public service broadcasting for children in the production of those programmes than there was a decade ago. And you can look at the Ofcom figures that came out this year. In 2015, the total value of production for PSB Kids was about £145 million. Last year it was 160 million. What's interesting, and where John's right, is what's going on within those numbers. So over that period, over the last 10 years, the amount of money that's actually coming directly from public service broadcasters, and it's the BBC along with Channel 5 as well, who do Milkshake, that has fallen. It's fallen quite sharply. It's fallen by 25% from 102 million to about 77 million last year. At the same time, though, the amount of third-party money has rocketed. That's gone from 43 million to 83 million over the same decade. This is third-party money going into the PSB shows in the form of co-productions or producer equity from John's members, co-productions from us, tax breaks, a few other things. For our part, we put £25 million last year into PSB shows as co-financiers, which is a very significant amount, I think. That's greater than the Young Audience Fund, and it's more than the commercial PSBs combined actually spent from their own content budgets. So what you have is the shows that you're watching, or your kids are watching on BBC or on Channel 5, they're actually, to a greater extent than ever before, co-funded by my members, by John's members. So that's, on the one hand, great and testimony to the mixed ecology that we have, but it's also a sign of a system that is under incredible strain. So to keep making that level of shows, whether it's sustainable or not, I'm not sure.
An answer to the question that I asked.
An answer to the question, okay. So I think you would need to look, first of all, at the tax breaks. To answer a question in the previous session, I don't think the UK tax breaks are competitive globally. It nets out at about, I think, 29% of the budget in the UK. If you go to France, Canada, Spain, sorry, not Spain, Ireland, you'll get 40% plus. So that's the first thing that needs to be looked at. I do think a contestable fund would be welcome. I think a small contestable fund, we said between £5 and £10 million a year, in order to cash flow productions right at the start. I think that we could look at current national lottery funding and regional development agencies to create that fund. And then thirdly, I think if we really want to increase the amount of co-productions, and this is why I sort of went into how complex the financing system is, if we really want to increase the amount of private sector money going into public service content, one thing we should be looking at is windowing. And that's it. At the moment, if you co-produce with the BBC will go first in the UK. And that makes it very hard for a commercial company which needs to generate revenues in order to justify the investment it's making. It makes it very hard for a commercial company to do so. And BBC's sat before this committee for the high-end TV inquiry and said that they can't find enough co-producers. I think as part of Charter, we need to have this discussion.
Very good. And same question, please, to you, Jackie. Do you think that there's any way that the government can act or intervene to support this situation?
I do. I think there are several ways the government could, but I'll just state the situation in the UK is a lot worse than recent Ofcom figures suggest. If you go back to 2002, you're actually looking at an 85% decline in content over that period. And 2002, there was a lot less competition in the marketplace. So all that was being made was really being mostly consumed by children in the UK. So the decline has been massive, and the competition is now huge. And as the previous panel said, there are two major problems to the sector. One is funding, which is what we're to talk about now, but also it's got to be in conjunction with finding and making sure that this content is surfaced and seen by young audiences in this country, because I don't think it's ever been more important to have culturally relevant and specific content to understand their community and the country they live in. Co-productions are great. They've always been part of the children's production ecology. I used to be a producer myself, and co-producing with France and Ireland, wherever, always been part of the life. But what it does do, when it's sort of growing as a feature of financing, is diluting the cultural specificity of programme. If the BBC is partnering with one of Adam's colleagues, you'll have lots of editorial opinion. So things will get diluted and you'll have less culturally specific content at the end. For some things that doesn't matter so much. It's really important if you're looking at dramas that are notionally set in the UK, but the cultural tropes are from somewhere else. It's sort of a confusing picture, particularly when, the majority of content on YouTube is coming from North America. We're losing our cultural identity, and the children of this country are not seeing themselves reflected on screen adequately. So yes, there are things the government could do. Tax credits are brilliant. The current ones are massively helpful. I was working at the BBC when the animation tax credit came back, and it was utterly transformational. The number of projects have been trying to get the last bit of funding together. They all got greenlit at pretty much the same time when the tax credit came in. It was a nightmare trying to manage our internal budget to make sure that these shows got cash flowed, but we managed, and it was a brilliant and transformational thing. Tax credits are great for local producers, but also a great attractor for international co-production as well. So they are culturally relevant in many ways. An increment, I think, should be culturally specific. If we're going to give more money, I think that would be really helpful and help engender more content that really reflects the UK. So tax credits, yay to those. Everybody loves them, apart from Treasury, as we heard last session. I think there's a lot of value in regional attraction funds. As we know, the BBC are the biggest commissioner in the UK for children's content, and perhaps in the world for children's content. And it's absolutely fundamental that they continue to be supported. And again, as Ollie was saying earlier, the proportion of children's budget, of the whole BBC budget, is not in proportion to the number of children in this country. So more funding from a reallocation to children's would be great. And again, making sure that it is culturally specific content and there's less of a need for international co-productions as part of the main strategy of children's as it is now. Because children need to see themselves on screen. It's vital they do. And so we need to get more of that content out there and surfaced. Of course, I'm going to mention the Young Audiences Content Fund. I think it was a brilliant thing. I would, of course, but there was also an evaluation that showed that it was massively successful, it was fair, efficient, it was transparent, and it was actually great value for money. It cost, the white paper that established it set a budget of 57 million, up to 57 million over 3 years, and it was specifically for the provision of content and extending the plurality of content available to young audiences in the UK, and it absolutely delivered on that intention. It also, as well as doing the job it intended to do, it brought so many different sorts of value to the country and to young audiences. There was economic value. The gross value added was a much stronger number than any of the tax credits. Industrially, what it did for production companies, the development piece supported fantastic development, because you need money to give structure and process to development if you're going to get something good at the end. And that was demonstrated in 11% of the development projects being commissioned. The production piece, it really diversified the offer. So many different new producers from all around the country doing all sorts of different genres and techniques. The biggest joy one of the biggest joys was seeing the Indigenous language broadcasters actually making live action content for their audiences for the first time ever. And that's important, to see yourself on screen. It delivered cultural value to young audiences. They were seeing all sorts of new content, different content. It was appreciated by young audiences that did see it, according to research we conducted alongside the fund, and also by the number of broadcast recommissions that the shows got. And then societally, this sort of content that is specific to our culture is massively important for societal cohesion. Understanding others around you, it's cultural glue, and it's really important. So I would advocate for a fund any day of the week. I'll stop talking now, I've gone on.
Young audience.
Chair, could I add a corollary to Jackie's?
What, sorry, John?
Could I add a supplementary, please?
You can.
Thank you. Yes, I think there was something that Ollie mentioned, and something that I think I was involved in setting up the Young Audience Content Fund with John Whittingdale when he was Culture Secretary. It wasn't meant to be a kids fund, and then we persuaded him it should be a kids fund, and thank God he listened, and all credit to him at the time. One of the other things which was actually very important in the Young Audience Content Fund, and it was the money that you could get for R&D, basically, because to develop a product in a highly competitive market is more expensive now than it's ever been. So even if we get money from making the show, very often the producer has to defer their production margin. The production margin is what you put into R&D. So in order to compete in a global market, it's got more and more expensive. And the R&D fund, the allocation of the budget from the fund for just R&D, speculative R&D, was absolutely transformative for the kids sector because it's very expensive. I would make a plea to government, and when I did the first sector plan with Greg Clark, we asked that the government consider opening up the R&D, the existing R&D tax credit, which the tech sector and many others benefit from, to the creative industries. Because that would get in a global competitive market, getting your product developed to get people to invest is harder and harder. So it would be a big welcome boost, not just to the kids sector, not just to the British TV or film sector, but to the wider creative economy. And that is something that is absolutely in the gift of government. It was government that removed us from it when it was first introduced under Gordon Brown. And I would love for the government to review that in order to allow the creative economy to be able to access the R&D tax credit. We are as important as life sciences and many other important sectors who do benefit from the R&D tax credit.
And you'll recall, John, that was one of the recommendations of our British Film and Higher
And I welcomed it deeply, and thank you. But I think government who has successive governments have promised to think about it.
We need to recommend it again.
I think a stronger recommendation would be very welcome for the entire creative economy.
Very good. Let's move on. Cam.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, John. How are your members responding to audiences moving to YouTube?
Well, you heard from Richard. I mean, all of my members are playing in YouTube as professionally produced content, but many of them have now set up dedicated digital production parts of their business. So they might be using some existing IP and spinning out new content to put on YouTube channels. But you also heard from Maddie, making money from YouTube is very, very difficult unless you have gazillion views and you're monetizing very fast. The algorithm favours volume. You heard from Maddie's experience as a YouTube creator. So some of my members are making very small amounts of money. Some are making nothing. It's a loss leader for many to get into that market and understand it and see what they can do with their content. But when you get people saying, well, YouTube will sort everything, I have a simple premise. We used to be an economy and a culture where I came up with a brilliant idea. You liked it and wanted to give me money to go and make it. And I then hired everyone to go and make it, and then I gave you the production. And then hopefully you made money, we made money. YouTube is self-publishing. I have to pay for everything. So the barrier to entry, and this is where you touch on issues around diversity and social inclusion, the barrier to entry on YouTube is difficult because you have to pay for everything. You heard from Maddie, she probably works very hard to make not very much money. So YouTube, I think, is a way of attracting people back to your content, building up fan base, trying new ideas. It's very exciting. But the idea that it's going to replace significant investment in original content, I just don't think is real.
Can I just add to that? Yes. I think YouTube content creators, there are a lot of great inventive people, and some of them make absolutely fantastic content like Maddie, and there's a lot of other content too. But the reality is, if you are a UK producer or any producer that comes to that, making content for YouTube, it is your own business to make that content happen. It's essentially sweat equity, and then you're banking on by luck or some sort of speaking to the algorithm, that your content gets surfaced and you start making some revenue back. But as we've heard, for children's, under the COBA regulations, the proportion of money you can make from YouTube advertising revenue is tiny. But the difference is, if people that are successful in getting new content serviced make content for the algorithm, not for children. It's a different style, a different approach of production, and I think that is something that we need to think about, because children, their neural pathways are developing, there's a lot of brain plasticity. If you are letting them absorb the content this way, which is more of the same, they're going to develop a very specific, hardened neural pathway, and that, in the long term, is not going to be good for society or them.
Adam, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add a few things, actually. I mean, I'll go to YouTube first, and then I'd like to come back to the content fund and cultural specificity. So YouTube, for us, the problem is, I mean, YouTube accounts for 44% of kids viewing now, 44%. VSPs in general, 48%. So that's almost half the audience is over there. And there were revenues there. We'd put our content on YouTube, and there were revenues, but more recently, those have dried up. And to be fair to YouTube, for understandable reasons, and they've introduced sort of the Made for Kids protection, which basically means you cannot target advertising to kids on YouTube. And we can all understand why you would do that. That has absolutely obliterated the revenues that were on it. So we've lost nearly half the audience, and there's no revenues there. On the contestable fund, I just wanted to add a couple of points. So you will be aware that the first fund was not open to subscription services, and there were valid reasons for that, but it did mean that for most COBA members, the fund, it was very welcome for public service broadcasters, but it didn't work for us. And even if you co-produced, there was a 2-year holdback before you could release it in the UK. So if you want to attract private sector investment, non-PSB investment into the genre, then with a new fund, then that would need to be open to subscription services. And on the specificity points that Jackie raised, I do think co-productions can be cultural specific, and frankly, pretty much everything you look at on some PSB channels is a co-production. So if it's not culturally British, then something is deeply, deeply wrong in the PSB system. I think it is culturally British, but one way you might address that would be to come back to the windowing system. If you could go first in the UK, then you can make a much more gritty, difficult, challenging, UK-centric show. And the proof of that is Adolescence, which was mentioned in the previous session, which was absolutely a searingly local, and yet obviously with global appeal. It's no coincidence that was not a co-production, because why would you make that show if you couldn't show it in the UK?
Thanks, Adam. John, in your evidence, you talked about producers self-financing children's content to go on YouTube, but you said that the income generated is nowhere near those levels. What percentage proportion of your membership would you suggest are struggling? Would you describe as struggling?
Well, I think kids producers have been struggling for 20 years, to be quite honest. I think it's always been, as I say, it's a canary in the coal mine. So we've seen many people exit the industry over that period. Jackie referred to the early noughties, where we had a booming kids sector. There was a lot more investment, many more commissions, more diversity of suppliers. So no one comes up to me and says, you know what, I'm about to fail tomorrow. But I know the sector is severely stressed, and I think that's why your inquiry is very important. Because I think we've had 20 years post the Communications Act, which failed to protect children's programming. We've had 20 years of hand-wringing, reports from Ofcom, reports from Parliament, but we're only managing decline. So,
what needs to happen to bridge that financial gap?
Well, I've suggested some interventions at the beginning. I think, and it's been touched on by Ollie and indeed by yourself, Chair, about the proportion of investment that the BBC puts from its budget into children's programming. It seems to be not representative, and maybe, as Ollie touched on, is that to do with the fact that children don't pay the licence fee? But they are the licence fee payers of the future. And when ITV closed down CITV, for good commercial reasons. I said, but you're just closed down your audience. That's an audience that would grow up watching ITV. So it's a short-term commercial fix, and I understand why, because there are PLC and so on. But for the BBC, surely if they're worried about the future licence fee payers, bigger and greater investment in kids' content would seem to be not only good for our society, but good for the BBC.
If we lose the BBC, what happens to children's content? Adam, to each of you.
We're left with pretty much nothing of any value. On YouTube, increasingly we're seeing a lot of content created by bots, and it'll be YouTube providing all of the content then, I imagine. The streamers will be present as well, but if you've got a subscription, that's fine. But again, and no disrespect, I'm a big fan of all the streamers, I've got most of them, but they cater for global audiences, not local audiences, and they try and please all the people all the time, and they succeed a lot of the time. I think something like Sex Education, which was set very near where I grew up, in a high school, but in the Usk Valley, so beautiful scenery, lovely. But all of the tropes within it were very much high school American culture. So, it was a great entertaining programme, and I learned some things, let me tell you now. But it's not the same as the sort of content that the BBC would make, that any UK public service broadcaster would make, because it's not truly reflecting our young people and our audience.
Can I say something? First of all, to lose the BBC or to lose the licence fee for kids' content would be disastrous. Okay, so make that absolutely clear. It'd be absolutely disastrous. And the thing is, the market is so tough with YouTube fragmenting audiences, with advertising restrictions around junk food, which we could all understand why they're there, but that took £200 million a year out of the advertising sector, with tax breaks that I don't believe are that competitive. The market is so tough that we can't finance original content on our own, or very rarely can we finance original kids' content on our own. So we need to partner with the BBC to be involved, and with other broadcasters, obviously. On sex education, now I don't actually represent Netflix, so I don't feel I need to defend it, but sex education always gets this bad rap, and I think it's quite instructive about the complexity of the ecosystem that we have, because sex education gave a platform to a new generation of British talent. Amy Lou Wood got her break there, Nkuti Gatwa got his first break there, and it's no coincidence that after Nkuti had established himself, the BBC, after 60 years of Doctor Who, appointed its first black Doctor Who, because he'd built up a global following with younger audiences via sex education. So even though it might not represent, it might not be a gritty kids show, it does have a value to the whole UK ecosystem.
Adam, I completely agree, Adam, and I was just making the point that it's different to UK public service content, subtly sometimes, and it's a great show, I love it. And Shooty was great.
Anything to add, John, to wind up?
No, I would just reinforce hopefully what I've been saying is that I think we're at a very, very important point. And I think hand-wringing and reports without action over the next 5 to 10 years will be letting British kids down.
Thanks.
Bio, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the panel. So I'm going to sort of focus a little bit back on sort of co-productions. I know we've touched on it a little bit sort of in the previous section. So to John, so how important is the role of co-productions for your members? I know we've the sort of cultural accuracy has been sort of mentioned. That was a really sort of poignant point, Adam, you mentioned regarding BBC and Doctor Who. And so, yeah, I'd like to hear a bit more of your thoughts on that.
Any other people's money, OPM, is always important. And British producers are some of the most entrepreneurial on the planet. The reason why is because we own the copyright in the programmes that we get commissioned to produce for the UK PSBs. So we're able to take those rights to Adam's members or to other financiers or co-producers and actually have something to give them. There's rights we can share, there's copyright we can share for those territories. So co-production has become more important over the past 5 to 10 years. It's always been important in kids, and it's always been very important in UK feature film production. But it's become more and more important just in general financing, where it works. It doesn't always work. It can often bring editorial problems. I've got one of my, not in kids, but I've got a scripted drama producer who basically uses tax credits all around the world. And he probably spends more time filling in tax returns to get his tax credits than he does actually producing. But he has to in order to make the show. So the more parties to financing, the more difficult the show can often become. So if you're wanting a co-producer, you've got to search for them very carefully and find the right one that fits with the project so that you're still able to deliver it back to whoever your primary buyer is, with what their expectations are being met. So you don't want co-production to dilute the specificity of the product, because when I give it back to the BBC or whoever, they'll go, well, that's not what we thought we were getting. So it is important, provided that it's the right thing. So, and the UK successive governments have been very good at agreeing co-production treaties with key territories, and I've been involved in designing and crafting some of them over the years as well.
Thank you. Pact commissioned research found finance from international co-production partners is becoming increasingly difficult, and this is leading to some sort of difficult projects being unable to sort of begin filming. So why is this becoming more difficult? Adam, can I come to you first? Because I know you addressed sort of inflation and investment earlier on in your questions, but why is this becoming more difficult?
Co-production.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. Okay, so it is, and it isn't. I don't think co-production per se is becoming hugely more difficult. I mean, there's a lot of challenges in the market in terms of raising finance, and particularly in the US, and getting US companies on board for a US sale. But the number of co-productions, and by co-production I mean sort of co-finance, co-commissions, there's where different broadcasters or streamers are involved at financing stage. It might not be a statutory co-production under a treaty, but the number of co-productions has held up actually. What is interesting, what's changed, is there's been a gradual shift, and this is not just in kids, this is in all sort of drama. There's been a gradual shift towards a greater proportion of those co-productions being returning series, and that was touched on by one of the previous panelists. Where, so if you've got this series, the second series in a show, that's a returning series, and that's more likely. That's taking up more and more of the co-production space. So if you've got a new property, brand new property, it's harder to get it away. But the actual number of co-productions has stayed pretty consistent.
Brilliant, thank you. And John, would you like to come in on that? Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we can use. I mean, it's sort of semantics. Co-production. We would call it co-financing when we pre-sell a show to another broadcaster. And that market is pretty robust. Secondary sales have been very difficult in the UK, partly because the BBC's put prohibitions on our ability to sell shows to Netflix, which previously we were, and that's closed the door. That's money on the table that we can no longer access, and that's I don't think that's right. And we've been campaigning with the BBC for them to change that, because that might help get the show made. So in terms of traditional co-production, I think it's pretty much where it's always been. But to Adam's point, I think everyone is chasing other people's money. It's not just us. It's the French, it's the Spanish, it's the Germans, it's the American. I mean, everyone's chasing the same money. The money globally, in spite of the figures you might see for someone looking to buy Warner Brothers, the money globally for content isn't growing. But it's under more expectation. People need to make more content in order to retain audiences. So it's a matter of quantum and how much money there is there, how much of it can we get, and is it enough to make the show to the quality we need to remain competitive.
And so, how does this situation sort of affect your members' ability to enter into sort of co-production and sort of IP sort of relationships?
Well, thankfully, if we're working for a UK PSB, we own the IP, so we've got a market advantage, that we've got something to take to market, so that should be maintained at all costs. Last year, British independent producers put nearly £700 million of deficit finance, as we call it, debt, to support British PSB programming. So that's money we raise from the market, which has to be recouped before we make any money. We put that into British programmes. So that's risk that we put into those programmes. So British producers work really hard to get the money to make the shows you all enjoy, but the margins on that are becoming much, much finer and much harder, and it's taking much longer to raise that money in order to get the show made. And that's applying across the piece now. And that's a very worrying trend. Now, something that's been very common in children's production for some time, which we're now seeing emerging in all genres, is producers are deferring their production fee in order to close the finance on the product. So that's the margin I make as a business, so that's my profit margin. So producers are basically giving that up in order to get the show made. Now, that's very worrying for R&D. And it's very worrying for growth and investment, because you can't maintain that cycle. If I'm not making any money, or I only make money when I've recouped all the debt that I've put into the programme, you've not got that reinvestment going back into new ideas, new talent. It's not sustainable. And that's long been the case in children's. It's long been the case in British feature film as well. But we're now seeing that emerging across the piece in original British content.
Thank you. Adam, I'll come back to yourself. So what's your views on, obviously I've just heard from John, but what's your views on the importance of the sort of co-production in the financing of children's TV?
Well, first of all, I agree with John in terms of the strain on the system. And as I said at the start, in my rather long opening remarks, the amount of third-party money in kids, PSB kids, has grown and grown and grown to the point where, I think John's members, my members, and tax breaks are actually propping up the PSB system at the moment. In terms of how sustainable that is, it's really hard to say. I mean, I do think in terms of, we spiked in terms of in production, and then production went down. I do think there are sort of green shoots to suggest we may have bottomed out in terms of investment. Now we're plateauing. I saw that the Pact Exports survey last year showed that exports of kids' contents were up, and Ofcom's figures showed that third-party investments at a record level. But sorry, to answer your question, I mean, I don't know, to be honest, how sustainable it is. It feels like it can't go much further, but that's just a gut feeling.
Thank you. COBA's evidence asks for the BBC to take a more flexible approach on windowing to attract sort of more third-party sort of co-production money. So can you explain sort of the issue and how it might help the amount of co-productions?
So, and I'm only suggesting this in a minority of cases, not suggesting the BBC would go second on all of its things. But at the moment, and this is not a problem, the BBC has come to this committee and said it can't find enough co-production partners. So I'm not just saying this from our point of view. I think this is an issue for everyone. At the moment, if you co-produce with the BBC on a UK show, the BBC will take the first window in the UK. Now, the BBC has a very big reach, and that makes it very difficult for a relatively small subscription service afterwards to actually make any revenues back. When you flip it round, there is an example where the BBC went second, and that is on the much-loved Bluey, which is an Australian show with very complex financing, where the BBC was a co-producer with the Australian production company. Now on Bluey, which has immense public service values, I think it shows amongst many other things, it's got a father taking a very active role in bringing up kids. On Bluey, when it came to the UK, Disney went first. Disney had the premiere, and a year later the BBC showed Bluey, on iPlayer and free-to-air. And it did very well for the BBC when it did. It was the biggest kids show that month for the BBC, and I think it's been very successful for them ever since. So there is a model that says, yeah, sometimes things could work if the BBC went second, and that would open up more funding opportunities for us to come in.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jackie, would you like to come in? Anything you want to
I would
that?
just on the Bluey point. Bluey was acquired by the BBC. It was funded by BBC Studios in co-production with ABC Australia. So it was a studios, a distribution entity touched the BBC, not an original co-production with the BBC. But the problem with co-production is real and it is global. Broadcasters everywhere are suffering the same, as we are here, and everybody's more risk averse. People have less money to put into commissioning. And with children's, it is more acute than anywhere else because we're always the market leaders in problems in financing. What I would say, the fundamental problem with co-productions, it is very much like the tax credits. If you don't have a commission, you can't co-produce with anybody. And currently, it's pretty much only the BBC where you'll get a commission. So that's a fundamental problem. There's just not enough activity going on with the commercial PSBs. I know 5. Louise does really well with a tiny budget for 5. But, still, the offer there is very small comparatively. And just as an example about the good that something like the Young Audiences Content Fund can do, there was a beautiful series that Louise at Milkshake commissioned, and all of the Indigenous broadcasters got on board because it was culturally spoke to all of the nations of this country. It's beautiful stuff. Tweety and Fluff, watch it, it's beautiful. It did really well with audiences. Louise commissioned a second series. The fund went, and she's unable to get the rest of the money despite lots of international sales because the money is not there. So if we want beautiful shows like that, we're going to have to get behind them. And that's the thing about the fund. It was just getting going, and projects were just taking off when it was stopped. And so this beautiful series that had the potential to do so well is now stopped in its tracks, and probably there won't be a second series. So that opportunity to create a Bluey, another Hey Dougie, another Peppa Pig, we won't have any more of those shows.
I agree. I wanted just to say, just to clarify, I don't think windowing is the answer in itself. I think we need to look at more structural funding models. We need the tax breaks. We need a review of that, and I think a contestable fund would be a great idea, and particularly as a cash flowing point.
John, final word.
Yeah, I think you saw it from the previous panel. We punch way above our weight as a nation in terms of the audiovisual global economy. We're a tiny country and we're not spending way as much money as the Americans do on content, yet we're often in the top 10 wherever you look at adolescence, look at all the shows. We've got the ideas, we've got the competence, we've got the ability. It's the money that's the problem. Closing finance and getting to market is the real problem, and I think it's not a fault of ideas or ability, it's market failure, and that's where governments have a role in addressing market failure in order to make sure that we're providing the goods that our society want.
Thank you.
Rib?
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with you about Milkshake. My sister Connie Huck was the original presenter when Channel 5 first started, and then she went on to Blue Peter. So, sorry, we haven't praised Channel 5 enough because they are still doing good stuff. Just wanted to ask again, Yakov, it sounds like a yogurt, but Young Audience Content Fund. One thing that, I know all the evaluations were glowingly positive, and obviously you headed it and you oversaw it. Do we know how sort of regionally distributed those funds were?
Yeah,
70%
of the funding went to companies outside of London and the South East. So we touched every corner of the country pretty much. There were projects in the islands, in Northern Ireland, in Wales, and all across the country. And it created great value jobs. It upskilled all around the country. It built value in companies that, were struggling before. Because IP brings value to a company, and intellectual property has a value. And again, that was another benefit of the development piece of the fund. It created a lot of, IP generation in those companies. Yeah, so it was all around the country in all sorts of different communities, and hearing voices that haven't had voice before. So it was great in that respect.
Okay, and Scotland, Wales, everywhere.
The nations and regions. And the Indigenous languages broadcasters, that they all participated in the fund. In fact, they came together for some projects. There's a project called Soul, which was commissioned just before the pandemic and then produced during the pandemic. And all of the Indigenous language broadcasters agreed to share this short film with all of the commercial PSBs as well who weren't participating, to create a moment of reflection at the winter solstice at the end of the terrible year of COVID. It was a beautiful thing, and collectively so many talented individuals and broadcast and production came together to hold hands with the audience essentially.
It brought back how?
Twice.
Yeah, no, I remember being lobbied about it when it was going, because also people were saying that most of its short life was under COVID, sort of thing, 19
and
to 22.
Despite that, it was brilliantly successful.
Julia Lopez, I remember going to see her about it. Do we know what current government feeling is on it?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I don't know why the fund was stopped. It was a pilot with a 3-year lifespan, but in the contestable fund white paper that established it said that there would be an evaluation before a decision was made to close or continue, and it was just closed without warning. And we were shocked and upset, and the industry was devastated by that loss, and I still don't know the real reason for it.
I mean, I've got a couple on basically son of Yaakov or young adults contents fund 2.0, what that will look like. I think you've put together a proposal.
Yeah,
I think it should be different and how it should be funded. So the previous panel, they were saying levies.
Yeah, sure. The 2018 contestable fund white paper, it absolutely prioritised producing more content development and production, and also just creating a more plural content offer to children. And it wasn't really considering what was happening with the VSPs and the streamers, and so how they were taking more eyeballs away from the legacy platforms. So that would be a thing that I would do as a new fund, is, it's got to be in concert with some sort of funding mechanism, whether it's a public service algorithm that, we ask the VSPs and streamers nicely to adopt. So we are seeing more UK content in the UK, that would be a thing, but finding it's all got to come with that. But with the new fund, I think money has to follow the audiences, so it should be platform agnostic. If you're offering content to children in a space, then you can apply for this fund. You don't have to have a broadcast commission from the legacy broadcasters, but you can. It would be helpful towards the funding model. You can, I think we should be a bit more relaxed about the sort of the ID requirements to come into the fund, so not just companies. Individual content creators, we've got to find a mechanism to allow them to kind of quite easily apply for money that will quick turn around their content and get it. So, that's the immediacy and the relevance of a lot of that content that children enjoy. I think the content should be all kinds of everything to suit all of the different platforms. We shouldn't exclude things like Roblox because a lot of children are there. So thinking about that, where are children, let the money follow it. And so the thing that we need to kind of maintain in terms of the public serviceness is like the original fund, have a suite of priorities that speak to our cultural wants and needs, and if a project can meet those priorities in a significant way, then they should be eligible for the fund, I believe, because we need to kind of try and meet the audience where they are, which has been said quite a lot of times. I think the other thing as well, a lot of the sort of higher budget productions, they spent quite a lot of money on borrowing costs, because in all of this, as well as all the other problems, quite often broadcast licence fees aren't cash flow through production. The tax credit isn't tax flow through production. So producers have to borrow quite significant amounts of money to actually get their production made, because cash flowing production, it can be large sums of money. And so borrowing costs, legal costs, were sometimes running into tens, if not six figures. So the fund, because you're doing due diligence on each entrance, which we did at the fund, we, did due diligence in a couple of banks I could mention, but, you could offer some sort of soft loan to producers to cash flow that. That's a thing that government could do via the business bank, maybe have a soft loan facility, because that money is safe, as broadcast licence fees or whatever, tax credit. So that would be a thing. So I'd also, with a new fund, if the show is appropriate and it is able to potentially make revenue abroad, have some sort of recoupable element to the fund. It's not going to be self-sustaining in any early years, but at least it will be some sort of revenue back to replenish the pot. And as long as the terms on the producers aren't too sort of onerous, then it could be something that is helpful in the longer term. Because a new fund, it should be long term. 3 years wasn't enough. Projects were only just getting going. Producers were only just starting to feel a real benefit. Yeah. What the fund did bring was a lot of confidence to the sector, and that is in very short supply at the moment.
And it would save people from having to go in with Disney or the huge people.
Sorry.
John.
Yeah, but I don't mind people making shows for Disney. Whoever wants to buy our creativity and our talent, brilliant.
Diversify, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we benefit from having a very mixed economy in the UK. So my members work for streamers, they work for Adams members, they work for PSBs. Half of it, British indie revenue comes from North America, where we make shows for a lot of the American networks. But Jackie raised an important point, which maybe for another select committee, beginning with T, is that the British banks have abandoned us. We cannot get cash flow the money we need in order to make the productions. Thankfully, under PSBs, we get stage payments, but they can take a long time. So I have spent most of the money before I get any money. So I have to go to the bank to borrow money to cover my running costs for making the product. And most of the high street banks won't lend now. So most of my members are now going to ex-UK banks who charge exorbitant rates, which I've then got to take out of my budget, i.e. my money, in order to cover the cost of the cash flow. And I think it's something I've raised with Minister Bryant before, that is something government could look at, and why are British banks not lending appropriately to the creative economy? Because generally we borrow to make the show, to make the product, and then we're paying other people a lot of money to go to other shareholders instead of coming into the British economy.
The British Business Bank any more receptive?
Well, the British Business Bank aren't a lending bank. They're an underwriting institution. So if someone, and generally they don't do loans, if I set up a private equity fund to invest in content, they would underwrite it. So it's a guarantee. They're not actually a direct lender. So that's one of the problems, that they can't actually lend money under preferential terms to the creative economy. It has to go through a private sector third party in order to do that. It's the high street bank lending which is the problem. I mean, we've got some banks, Coots do lend, but their slate is full. They're not taking on any more clients. So my members are borrowing from Canada, Argentina, America, in order to get the money to make the shows that are...
Adam, would your members support a levy to pay for this new...
I doubt it. On a levy, I think the first point I'd like to make is that we already invest in public service broadcasting for kids. You know, we're already investing £25 million a year in BBC and Channel 5 shows as co-financiers, and that is more than the levy raises in Germany or Spain for all VOD content, you know, on all VOD suppliers for all genres. But the main point I think on a levy is to bear in mind that, you know, there's a fallacy in some of these discussions, not here but generally, about that just because a company is big that it's got a magic money tree and you can impose more costs on it, which is in this context what a levy is, and there's no knock-on effect, and it's just not true that. If you increase the costs, then there must be an impact somewhere. Most likely would be the content budgets that companies would look to cut. So you could end up undermining the actual co-financing model that is already incredibly under strain. It might alternatively be in jobs, in UK jobs, or it could be in terms of prices. But there must be an impact if a levy comes. And I would urge the committee to look at current funds that are already in the media sector, in the TV sector.
YouTube, could they cough up?
Well, I would say there's £50 million of National Lottery money that the BFI has. I don't believe a penny of that goes on children's content. It's worth, you know, there may be some around the edges, but there's certainly nothing significant. And there's also a lot of money that the regional screen agencies have that they use to fund content, and that is open to children's content, but I don't believe it's a priority. And you look at their websites and you look at their wish list, and they seem to be focused on high-end TV and film, and I think partly because they want to recoup their investment, and that, certainly some sub-genres in children's outside the preschool market that will play against a children's program compared to a more glossy drama or something like that. So I think it is time to have a review of our priorities. Could YouTube afford it? I don't know. I don't represent YouTube. In fairness, in fairness to them, I would say that since they have all the viewing, 44% of the viewing, but the advertising for kids, I'm not sure how much there is now that they have the Made for Kids system in place to stop you targeting adverts. So I'm not sure how much money they are making themselves out of it.
Asha.
Just to follow up on that point, I think, and I understand your cautiousness over a levy, but I think in this case, from the evidence we've heard, there is a value extraction of the kind of public service content that goes onto these platforms. There isn't a value exchange in equal because they have to put up a lot of the upfront costs to make this content. The value is extracted on YouTube, whether that be not through obviously the YouTube Kids bit, because that's not monetized, but the main platform, which is driven by viewing. That value is not invested back into the content production because it doesn't come back through. Although we have paid for it as a British public, but it's a global. It becomes a global thing when the value goes to YouTube. So surely, I would understand your cautiousness over a levy on say Netflix or something when it becomes to one long form piece of content. But when we're talking about YouTube, which is explicit model is content that's uploaded, the value is generated by views. Surely we need to review how that value exchange is happening.
I can completely understand that, yes.
Yeah. I'd completely agree with that.
There's a logic in that, and
I think the principle. I'm not defending YouTube, but I think if Parliament wants to consider those principles, then they have to consider them across the piece, because YouTube isn't a broadcaster, it's not a publisher, and it's fought many legal cases to make clear it's not a publisher, and so it's a platform. So if you're saying there's levy on a platform, then which platforms? In order to be fair to YouTube, I think, and it's right for Parliament to consider those questions, but I think those are profound questions about how we intervene in those types of markets. Other countries have done in Europe under legislation, the AVMS directive. This government and successive governments have chosen not to invoke that legislation for good reason, because, as Adam pointed out, you might just be taking money from Peter to pay Paul, or your net investment goes down, and inward investment is clearly an important thing for our inward economy. YouTube do not spend money, they do not commission, unlike the other platforms which do spend money and do invest.
I guess when it's a platform, not a platform, is if the algorithm editorialises what content is there, is it actually, because it's deciding it's monetizing that, but it's not just surfacing it, it's driving editorial.
I think many members of this House have the intellectual capacity to have that debate, because I think it's a very real one, but it's not just the UK that's asking those questions. So.
I think we need to take a holistic view of the whole landscape, and particularly for children's, because they are sort of front forward in sort of suffering the problems of the wider sector, which are coming down the track. So yes, we should look at it in the round, but it is such an unequal playing field. The VSPs and the streamers, they're lightly regulated, lightly taxed, but the streamers take advantage of the high-end television tax credit for those brilliant, beautiful, fantastic productions in Northern Ireland. But, they do very little children's content themselves. I think it was 12 hours of content last year that were from the streamers that accessed the tax credit across all of the streamers, the US streamers. So lightly taxed, lightly regulated, and then the traditional broadcasters, they've got all sorts of regulations imposed on them. And so we need to look at it holistically and look at what's right for the children of this country, because they should be taking social responsibility as well about what is happening in this country and what children are being served up. So I think a little bit of equity across the whole piece. Anybody that's serving content to children should be subject to similar regulation and taxation.
We need to move on because we're running massively over time. Let's move to Jeff quickly.
Well, very quickly then. This concern that you've expressed, Adam, about levies hitting streaming investment. Can you point us to other countries where this has happened? I'm thinking that there are levies in France and Australia and Canada. Where has that amounted to a reduction in streaming investment there?
There are a number of ways that the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is implemented. There can either be a quota on content that's made in a country, or it can be a levy imposed, and some countries do one or the other and some do both. But so far it's not impacted on investment, as I understand it, and actually France in particular are asking for the quotas on the AV directive to be increased to 50%. So, they're obviously not feeling a terrible impact, but it's doing some good in terms of their local content.
There is work going on looking at whether this has made a difference or not. I think the jury's out, because that research, it's not been long since these things were introduced. So actually the data isn't there yet to actually take a proper informed position about what it's actually delivered additionality or whether it's just displacement.
No, that's my understanding of it. The quotas, the levies where they exist are quite new. So I don't think there's a sort of body of work to point to impact either way, and I think that's pretty clear at the moment that it's unclear. But I think it's common sense. It must come from somewhere. Otherwise, you're sort of thinking that a company that's levied is going to sort of create this. Pay it, and there'll be no consequence in terms of. It's worth bearing in mind at the moment the whole sector is going through a huge amount of disruption, mergers and acquisitions everywhere. In the UK, we've already seen a lot of these companies making redundancies as the spate of mergers and acquisitions goes on, and they're looking to cut costs. So, I think it's very dangerous to take this investment for granted.
Right, I'm moving us on because I'm very conscious of the fact we're already half an hour over time. Let's go to Damien.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I was to ask about tax credits, but we've had tax credits come up quite a few times already. Is it fair to assume there is nothing more to say that you have not already expressed on the subject of tax credits and how you would like them to change? Oh dear, no, it is not true to say from the look of your faces. If anybody's got something they feel they have not said already about the tax credits regime, please go ahead.
You need commissions for tax credits to work, we all know that. Okay. But also I would say that the level of tax credit being claimed in this country is indicative of the state of the industry. In 2022, which is the latest data I've seen, £836 million from Treasury went on HETV, £27 million on children's television. There is the discrepancy.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing further on tax credits, can I ask about costs? So in the Pact evidence, comparing 2024 to 2018, it talks about there's basically sort of flat cash in PSB spend. If you apply, sorry, I've done this very amateurly while we've been sitting here. I think if you just apply normal inflation to that means there was a 23% decrease in spend. Yeah. There was a 43% decrease in the number of hours of original output. Why?
Yeah, because inflation in our sector is asymmetrical, so we're affected by macroeconomic inflation, which everyone experiences, but we've also experienced considerable, and it's a consequence of inward investment and inflation in our talent market. Talent costs over that period have gone up close to 20%, as indeed our. Basically because talent has a wider market, it can sell itself into, and agents will seek to get the best price for their talent when they're negotiating. So, and broadcasters, in order to get a commission off the few we can try and win, we have to package talent and take that to the buyers, that talent comes at a much higher premium than it did prior to 2018. We had a boom in the UK, as everywhere did post the COVID, when there was a massive boom.
Is that
talent costs and labour costs have gone up.
So is that another way of saying children's television presenters are paid a lot more than they used to be?
No, John's not talking about children's. You're talking more broadly.
I'm talking more broadly, but
the question was about
also what our buyers want in order to punch through with the limited funds they have are often much bigger, more ambitious projects. So they cost more, basically.
So I would say that it's largely to do with the type of content that's being produced. There are sort of more big projects, if you like, that will appeal to international markets and fewer very local productions like factual entertainment programmes.
That also ought to bring a revenue expectation with it, presumably.
Well, that's the intention about doing more of those bigger international projects.
But it's also to punch through. As we've heard, kids are 44% of them are on YouTube. So in order to try and, for a domestic broadcaster to try and get an audience, they're going to have to get something that gets attention, and that's often much more expensive to do.
But there's a
if it works,
there's a revenue to come with that.
Well, if it works, and if it's a hit, and I've said before to other people, if I knew what was going to be a hit, I wouldn't be sitting here. No one does. It's always prototypical. It's always a gamble.
Can I ask Adam? So it's a bit the cancellation of CITV is a bit vexing for different reasons, including the kind of future audience marketing aspect that you mentioned. I mean, what actually is the minimum cost of running a channel? I mean, obviously, you can put an awful lot into a channel. You can have 24-hour output and star presenters and all the rest of it. On the other end of the scale, you can have one of these things you see with sort of semi-automated. Doesn't really any kind of many people, program teeing things up at all. It's just kind of content. If you've really got a library of content, how much does it really cost to run a channel?
I mean,
for Adam, I think.
I don't represent ITV, but I'll give you an example. I'll give honourable mention to Sky Kids, which you heard had closed in the previous panel. It has not closed. It's still continuing as a kids channel. They have 2 years worth of new kids content they haven't shown yet, so they'll be dripping that out. I mean, they have announced that they will be stopping. That they are stopping commissioning new kids shows, but they have a pipeline. But I want to mention something else they've done, which I know this committee's received a separate submission on, and that's Children United, which is, I think, the holy grail of children's public service content. It's an online news and factual channel for kids, and Sky's partnered with a range of different bodies. It's World Wildlife Fund, Science Museum, UNICEF to fund this. It's the brainchild. The producer did FYI Kids, which got money from Jackie's fund back in the day, commissioned for Sky. And I think there is a model. I don't have the number for what the budget is on that, but there is an example of a service that's really, I suspect, being run lean and mean and absolutely delivering public service values. It's also free.
And can you give us a benchmark of how much it costs? Just, whatever the minimum infrastructure is you need, whatever bandwidth or whatever.
That's commercially sensitive information generally. I can say that if you're running a channel which is just acquired,
it would help us to challenge. You don't have to give us. You don't have to give us something that's going to move a market. We just need to know how many zeros there are in it.
I wouldn't know.
Okay.
You can look at. I can't get into. I actually don't know what my members would, the numbers of my members, but I can give you what. If you look at the BBC, because they publish accounts, and you can look at content spend versus distribution costs. And I believe, and this is off the top of my head, so better to check it. But I believe the BBC puts this distribution costs at 10% of its total budget, something like that.
Yeah, and they aren't doing totally basic, semi-automated. That is not the that's not the minimum viable product.
With that figure, please do.
We take it.
I would like to check
all caveats,
the BBC accounts.
We take that with all caveats. Thank you. Back in 2007, when the ad ban came in, presumably there were people saying this is going to stop a lot of programming of children's content.
Yes, I think...
Were any plans put in place to counter that fairly well. I say fairly obvious. There will also be people arguing, "Oh no, there's plenty of money in this system. I'm sure people could afford it." But we do seem to make these kinds of questions come around again and again and again. Every time we expect something different.
I think it was worse than no plans, because the ban came in straight after the 2003 Communications Act, and that diluted the children's quotas on the commercial broadcasters. So when Jackie was saying earlier that the regulation should be equivalent across different services, and we should be looking at putting obligations on non-PSBs. There are no kids' obligations on the two biggest commercial PSBs. I mean, you have Channel 4. Okay, Channel 4 has a loose requirement to do something which it fulfills by doing sort of older content, and arguing that children will watch that along with others in the household. But there's very, very little obligation on them, and so you have it was a double whammy where you removed the obligations and then removed the funding. And I can't blame ITV. It was a commercial company. It decided, well, that doesn't make sense anymore.
Yes. Finished. Vicky, last but not least.
Brilliant. So my question's on other forms of financing children's content, and if it's okay, I'm going to lump 3 bits in together on that. So the first bit, in terms of what other routes do you think could be explored to increase private investment in children's TV? Then, do the proposals in the government's creative industry sector plan and the Creative Places Growth Fund provide opportunities that could support the children's production? And then the third bit, which is what can be done to enable investment in children's TV that would enable more of the intellectual property to be kept in the UK? And I'm sorry, John, that you don't have pen and paper.
No. I was just going to say the fund was very specific in that the IP that was created all resided with UK companies. So any future exploitation, so it wasn't, it was there. So that was building value to start with. Then in terms of the new growth funds, they're very welcome. I've been at some meetings about the Greater Manchester Fund. So it's 25 million across 3 years, the Greater Manchester Fund specifically, and but it's across all media sectors. There's going to be a development and production fund, maybe both, maybe one, set up, but that's 10 million for production across 3 years and 1.5 million for development across 3 years. And the Northwest, Manchester, has a lot of different companies operating in scripted, high-end drama, children's, animation. That's not much money to go around a lot of people. So how that's all going to shake down, we'll see. But any investment is welcome. I mean, it might be that, skewing it more in development to actually start building those is a better use of money, but it's under discussion now, as you know. But anything new is welcome, but something that is dedicated to children's is needed. We owe it to them, and it's for the societal good in the long term. None of those new initiatives are ring-fencing any money for children. The regional attraction funds don't ring-fence money for children's, and indeed some of the bigger high-end TV productions have actually squeezed out local production for children's content. In the past, we've lost studios, production crew to those big, better finance productions. So,
I would add, what I said about the R&D tax credit, that'd be very helpful. I agree with the public support that is very welcome and becoming more and more necessary around the country. And it should be looking at the major growth opportunities in each region, and that may be one thing in one place and another thing in another. So I think they need to have a very deep understanding of the screen sector that they're looking to support and develop. I think we go back to sort of the British Business Bank for me. I think we've seen some welcome developments in the new sector plan, and the British Business Bank is more responsive. But I think if we could actually access the untapped billions of private finance that sit in our country, who are very averse to investing in the creative economy, where it's not just my sector, this is true of much of the creative economy, and they would invest in at project level, product level, rather than just enterprise level, then that may unlock a lot of money that currently we find very difficult to access. I mean, I've given a number of presentations over the years to various investment banks, and one of the serious bankers said to me, so what does your order book look like in 5 years? What would it look like for a typical creative company? I went, no idea, because we're only as good as our last job. We're only as good as our last fashion show. We're only as good as our last kids programme. So government could help with that, and the British Business Bank, I think, is key in that. But government generally could actually try and help the private sector to actually realise that we're a very investable and very profitable sector, and I would certainly welcome that.
Can I add something? I think one of the benefits, I think, of the co-financing model is that it does allow British companies to retain IP. We are co-financing with PSBs, and in a lot of those arrangements, rights are going to be shared, and the producer will retain rights under the terms of trade. You find, I'll give you an example, a great example recently, a show called Pip and Posy, which was a joint commission between Milkshake, Channel 5 and Sky, from Magic Light, who are the producers of The Gruffalo. And this was their first foray into preschool. So it was a move to make the company more commercial, move into a more commercial genre. Sky co-funded multiple seasons from them and also multiple spin-offs. So you had real support for building a company and building that show's profile. And then Magic Light, all through that, they retained global distribution and merchandising rights. And they've sold multiple markets all around the world. They've launched the show in the US, and coming up to Christmas, so if you want, you can buy magnets, aprons, cushions, posters, T-shirts and mugs, and contribute to Magic Light that way. So I think I just wanted to say that, that is a benefit of how we are working with PSBs at the moment. On the sector plan, I don't think there's much there in terms of children's. I had a look through it. I couldn't see anything, frankly, that is specifically about children's, even in the PSB section. And I can understand that the focus was on economic growth, right? So not on sort of public service genres. There is a commitment to keep the tax breaks competitive, rather. So I think that needs to be, you can perhaps hold the government to that. So, yeah, that's it.
Finished. Bayo, final question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, just to come back on the finance element around the UK banks. John, you mentioned that a lot of UK banks are not lending. Yeah. How long has that been the case, and what's the reasoning? I mean, are you touching upon that sort of understanding of investing in the creative sector?
Yeah, well, certainly for my members over the past 2 years, it's been a growing concern. Where, as I explained, we'd go to the bank, borrow the money, make the show, then we get paid and we pay everyone back and everyone's happy. And we'll get the cost of cash from the buyer to cover the interest. But for some reason, the banks that were doing that have exited the market. Maybe they have their own risk profiles and other concerns, and maybe they think this business sector is too risky for them. I don't know if anyone who's defaulted, because by and large, once you're commissioned, you make the show, and if you don't deliver the show, that's probably a career-defining moment. So I don't think it's a problem of default. It just seems to be a matter of appetite. And as I said earlier, the fact that we're now raising money and borrowing from non-UK banks at exorbitant rates is not good for our economy. So.
Just on that, would you be able to share with the committee the main sort of banks that would typically historically have funded productions? Would you know who they are?
I can survey my members and get a helpful list.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bayo. Can I thank all of our panel today for all your time and all your very fulsome answers. It's been great to have you with us, and may I take this opportunity to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a relaxing holiday with lots of delicious food, but most importantly, high quality children's television, whether that's Wallace and Gromit, Tiger That Came to Tea, whether it's Muppets Christmas Carol, or whether it's The Snowman. We all have our favourites, but we will continue this debate in 2026.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.